I'm Nicole Lima, 32, a quiet librarian who always believed love meant compromise. When David told me his mother's disapproval of our wedding venue mattered more than my feelings, something inside me cracked. For 2 years, I'd bet myself into shapes to please his family, swallowing my voice while they dismissed every choice I made. The final straw came when his mother declared I wasn't worthy of their family name right in front of David, who said nothing. What they didn't know was that 3 months earlier, I'd inherited my grandmother's estate. $2 million sitting quietly in an account they knew nothing about. While they treated me like a charity case who should be grateful for their son's attention, I held the power to change everything. But first, I needed to see just how far their greed would go. Because sometimes the quiet ones hold the biggest surprises. Asterisk, I met David Harrison 3 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when he wandered into the downtown library looking completely lost. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper with a call number scribbled on it, squinting at the shelves like they were written in hieroglyphics. I found it endearing, this tall, well-dressed man in his expensive suit, completely helpless among my books. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, and when he looked up with those warm brown eyes, I felt something flutter in my chest. "Please," he said with a sheepish grin. "I'm researching local history for a client presentation, and I have no idea what I'm doing." I spent the next hour helping him navigate the archives, watching him scribble notes with genuine enthusiasm. He was a marketing executive at a consulting firm. He told me, usually more comfortable with spreadsheets than dusty historical documents. When he asked if I'd like to grab coffee afterward, I said yes before I could overthink it. Those early months were magical. David seemed fascinated by my quiet world of books and stories. He picked me up after work and listened intently as I told him about the patrons I'd helped that day, the elderly man researching his family genealogy, the teenager discovering poetry for the first time. He made me feel like my work mattered, like I mattered. But then I met his family. The first dinner at the Harrison house should have been a warning. Their home in Riverside Heights was everything mine wasn't: sprawling, pristine, intimidating. Margaret Harrison answered the door in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving despite the autumn breeze. "So you're the librarian," she said, managing to make my profession sound like a communicable disease. David's father, Robert, was more subtle but equally dismissive. Over dinner, he peppered me with questions about my career plans and financial goals in a tone that suggested he already knew the answers would disappoint him. David's younger sister, Stephanie, kept checking her phone and rolling her eyes. Whenever I spoke, I tried to contribute to their conversations about country club politics and investment portfolios, but I felt like I was speaking a foreign language. When I mentioned a book discussion group I was organizing at the library, Margaret actually laughed. "How quaint," she said. "David, didn't you say Nicole volunteers there?" "She works there, Mom," David corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. That was the first crack in my foundation, watching David shrink under his mother's disapproval, seeing him struggle to defend me even when I was sitting right there. But I told myself it would get better. I convinced myself that Margaret just needed time to warm up to me, that David's family would eventually see what he saw in me. I started keeping a wedding planning binder, carefully organizing venue options, menu ideas, and color schemes. I spent hours researching affordable options that would still feel elegant, determined to prove I could plan something worthy of the Harrison name. Every time I showed David my ideas, his response was lukewarm at best. "We should probably run this by Mom first," became his standard response. My carefully curated plans, the charming garden venue I'd found, the vintage-inspired decorations I'd sketched all required Margaret's approval before David would even consider them. The binder grew thicker with rejected ideas and compromised solutions. Each crossed-out option felt like another piece of myself being erased. Another way I was being molded into what they thought I should be rather than who I actually was. I should have recognized the pattern then. I should have seen that David's love came with conditions, that his family's acceptance would always be contingent on my willingness to shrink myself to fit their expectations. But I was so grateful to be chosen, so flattered that someone like David's successful. Handsome, from a good family, wanted someone like me. My grandmother Elena would have seen right through it all. She'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, and she had no patience for people who tried to make others feel small. Mia, she used to say in her gentle but firm voice, never let anyone convince you that you need to earn the right to take up space in this world. But Grandma Elena was gone now, and I was left trying to navigate this new world of subtle slights and conditional love on my own. Or so I thought. The truth was, even in death, my grandmother was still looking out for me. The inheritance sitting in my bank account was proof of that. But David and his family had no idea that the quiet librarian they dismissed so easily had more money than their entire pretentious household. Combined dots. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you need, to see people's true colors even when you're not quite ready to look. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Saturday afternoon in Margaret, Harrison's perfectly appointed living room. I'd arrived with my wedding planner, excited to finally show her the venue I'd found, a historic mansion with beautiful gardens that offered reasonable packages for Sunday weddings. Margaret sat in her Queen Anne chair like it was a throne, her manicured fingers drumming against the armrest as I spread my research across her marble coffee table. Behind her hung the family portrait that dominated the room, an oil painting that had cost more than most people's cars, depicting 3 generations of Harrison legacy in gilt-framed glory. "This is where you want to hold our family's wedding?" she asked, barely glancing at the photographs I carefully arranged. "The gardens are beautiful in September," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the ballroom has those original chandeliers. Nicole." Her voice cut through mine like ice. "This is a budget venue. I can tell just by looking at it." David shifted uncomfortably on the sofa beside me, but said nothing. "It's actually quite elegant," I pressed on. "The Sunday rate makes it affordable. But the space itself is affordable." Margaret repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that really the impression we want to give our friends and family? That we chose the affordable option?" My cheeks burned. "I thought we agreed on a budget. We agreed on a reasonable budget for a proper wedding," she interrupted. "Not whatever this is." She gestured dismissively at my carefully organized materials. Hours of research, phone calls, site visits, all reduced to whatever this is, with a wave of her hand. "David?" I turned to my fiancé, hoping he'd finally stand up for me, for us. "You said you liked the garden photos." David looked between his mother and me like a tennis match spectator. "I mean, it's nice, but Mom has a point. Shouldn't we want something that reflects our values?" "Our values?" As if my values, beauty, meaning, careful planning within our means, didn't count. Margaret leaned forward, her blue eyes sharp as glass. "Nicole, dear, I think we need to have an honest conversation." The endearment felt like a slap. "When David told us he was engaged, we were ... surprised." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Not that there's anything wrong with librarians, of course. It's just that we always expected David to marry someone more suitable." The room went silent except for the ticking of their grandfather clock. "Suitable how?" I managed to ask. "Someone who understands our family's position in the community. Someone who can contribute meaningfully to our social obligations. Someone who..." She trailed off, then smiled that cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Someone worthy of the Harrison name. Worthy." The word hit me like a physical blow. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his mother that worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or country club memberships. Instead, he stared at his hands. "Mom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Margaret stood and walked to the window, her back to us. "David, you're 34 years old. You have a responsibility to this family, to your future children. Do you really want to start your marriage by settling?" Settling. There was that word again, the one that had haunted me since childhood. Suggestion that I was less than enough, that anyone who chose me was making a compromise. "I'm not settling," David said, but his protest sounded hollow. Margaret turned back to face us, and for a moment, I saw something almost like pity in her expression. Nicole, I'm sure you're a lovely person, but let's be realistic about what you bring to this marriage. You work at a library. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. What exactly do you contribute to David's future? Each observation felt like a paper cut small individually, but devastating in their accumulation. I contribute love, I said quietly. I contribute partnership and support, and love doesn't pay for a mortgage, Margaret interrupted. Love doesn't maintain the lifestyle David is accustomed to. Love doesn't secure your children's futures. Money isn't everything, I protested, but my voice cracked on the words. Margaret laughed, actually laughed at that statement, spoken like someone who's never had any. I felt David tense beside me, and for a moment, I thought he might finally find his backbone. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, maybe we should look at some other venues, just to compare options. Just like that, he sided with her. Again, the drive home was silent. David kept glancing at me, clearly wanting to say something, but lacking the courage to actually do it. When he finally pulled up to my apartment building, I sat in the passenger seat for a long moment, staring at my hands. She wasn't trying to be cruel, he said finally. She just wants what's best for our family. Our family. But apparently I wasn't really part of that family, yet maybe I never would be. Your mother's opinion matters more than mine, I said. It wasn't a question. That's not. He started to protest and stopped. She's just concerned about practical matters. And I'm not practical enough. Nicole, please. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what he meant, even. If he lacked the honesty to say it directly, I got out of the car without another word. My wedding planning binder clutched against my chest like armor. As I climbed the stairs to my modest apartment, I could hear David's engine idling in the parking lot, waiting to see if I'd turn around and wave goodbye. I DID single quotes T inside my apartment. I sat on my secondhand couch and stared at the binder that represented months of work, hope, and dreams. Dreams that apparently weren't worthy of the Harrison family name. That's when I remembered my grandmother's locket, the one I'd been wearing since her funeral 3 months ago. I opened it carefully, looking at the tiny photograph of Elena as a young woman, and felt something shift inside me. Margaret Harrison had no idea who she was dealing with. None of them did, but they were about to find out. 3 months earlier, I'd stood in the rain at Riverside Cemetery, watching my grandmother's casket being lowered into the ground. Elena Martinez had been 87 years old, sharp as a tack until the very end, and the only family I had left. She'd died peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday night. Just like she'd always said, she wanted to no fuss, no drama, just a quiet transition from one world to the next. I found her the next morning when she didn't answer my usual check-in call, lying in her bed with a peaceful expression and her hands folded neatly over her chest. Even in death, she was organized. The funeral was small, just me, a few of her neighbors, and Mrs. Chen from the corner market where Grandma Elena had bought her groceries for 30 years. David had offered to come, but I declined. This felt like something I needed to do alone, a final private moment with the woman who'd raised me and shaped me into who I was. What I hadn't expected was the reading of the will the following week, set in lawyer Jonathan Hartley's oak-paneled office, fidgeting with the tissue box he tactfully placed within reach, expecting to hear about a few $1,000s in savings and maybe some family heirlooms. Grandma Elena had lived simply a small house in an older neighborhood, careful with her money, never one for extravagance. Miss Lima, Mr. Hartley said, adjusting his glasses as he opened a thick folder. Your grandmother was quite specific about her intentions. He began reading in that formal legal voice, explaining the disposition of personal effects, her jewelry to me, her books to the local library, various household items to neighbors who'd been kind to her over the years. Standard stuff that made me smile through my tears. Then he cleared his throat and read the paragraph that changed everything. To my beloved granddaughter, Nicole Elena Lima, who has brought joy to my life every single day since she came to live. With me, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all financial assets, property holdings, and investments totaling approximately $2 million. I was sure I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Hartley looked up from the document with a gentle smile. Your grandmother was quite wealthy, Miss Lima. She invested wisely over many decades and lived well below her means. But that's impossible. She lived in that little house. She drove that old car. She was very careful about appearances, he explained. After your grandfather died, she said she learned that money was a tool, not a status symbol. She preferred to let it grow quietly. While she lived the life she wanted, my head was spinning. $2 million. My grandmother, who clipped coupons and shopped clearance sales, who taught me to mend clothes instead of buying new ones, had been sitting on a fortune the entire time. There's more, Mr. Hartley continued. She left you a letter. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandma Elena's familiar script. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Nicole, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably in shock about the money. Don't be. Your grandfather and I worked hard for every penny, and we invested it carefully because we knew that someday someone we loved would need it. That someone is you. I know you'll be wondering why I never told you about it. The truth is, I wanted you to grow up knowing your own worth wasn't tied to your bank account. I wanted you to be kind, hardworking, and genuine qualities that money can't buy, but poverty can't take away either. You have those qualities, Mia. You always have, but now you're an adult and life is going to test you in ways that require more than just good character. There will be people who try to make you feel small, who will judge your worth by the size of your paycheck or the address on your driver's license. When those people show their true colors, you'll be grateful to have options. Use this money wisely. Use it to protect yourself, to create opportunities, to help others when you can. But most importantly, use it to remember that you never have. To accept less than you deserve, not in love, not in work, not in life. You are worthy of respect, kindness, and genuine love, regardless of what's in your bank account. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, Grandma Elena. P.S. The key in my locket opens a safety deposit box at First National, box 247. There are some family photos and documents in there that I wanted you to have. I sat in that lawyer's office and cried not just from grief, but from an overwhelming sense of being seen and loved even after she was gone. My grandmother had known exactly what I would need, and when I would need it, the next few weeks had been a blur of paperwork, bank meetings, and financial planning sessions. I kept the inheritance completely secret, partly because it still felt surreal and partly because I wasn't sure how David would react. Our relationship was still relatively new, and I worried that sudden wealth might change the dynamic between us in ways I wasn't ready to navigate. Looking back now, that instinct had been absolutely correct. I'd left most of the money invested exactly as Grandma Elena had arranged it, taking only what I needed to pay off my small student loans and set aside an emergency fund. The rest sat quietly earning interest, waiting for me to figure out what to do with it. Now, sitting in my apartment after Margaret Harrison's brutal assessment of my worth, I finally understood what my grandmother had meant about people showing their true colors. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small jewelry box where I kept her locket. Inside, just as she'd said, was a tiny key. I'd been carrying it around my neck for months without even thinking about it, but now it felt like a secret weapon. The safety deposit box could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I had some thinking to do. I made myself a cup of tea, the expensive loose-leaf kind Grandma Elena had taught me to appreciate, and sat down with her letter again. Each word felt like armor, protecting me from the damage Margaret Harrison had tried to inflict. You never have to accept less than you deserve, not in love, not in work, not in life. For 3 years, I'd been accepting less. I'd been shrinking myself to fit into David's world, apologizing for my background, my job, my modest lifestyle. I'd been so grateful to be chosen that I'd forgotten I had choices too. But now, I knew something the Harrison family didn't. I had options. Real options, and I was going to use them to find out exactly who I was dealing with. The quiet librarian they dismissed so easily was about to show them what $2 million worth of confidence looked like. But first, I needed to see just how deep their contempt really ran. It was time to conduct an experiment in human nature. And I already knew exactly how it was going to begin. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. As I got ready for work, I caught myself in the bathroom mirror and saw something different in my reflection. Not the defeated woman who'd fled Margaret Harrison's living room, but someone with a secret advantage and the intelligence to use it. I'd always been good at observation. It came with the territory of being a librarian. You learn to read people, to notice what they're really looking for even when they can't articulate it themselves. But I'd been so focused on trying to fit into David's world that I'd stopped paying attention to what I was actually seeing. That was about to change. My first stop was First National Bank, where I used the tiny key from Grandma Elena's locket to access box 247. Inside, I found family photographs dating back generations, some immigration documents, and a folder of investment statements that made my head spin. My grandmother hadn't just been wealthy, she'd been methodical about building and protecting that wealth, but it was her handwritten notepaper clip to the top of the financial documents that made me smile. Nicole, remember, information is power. Never reveal your hand until you know exactly what game everyone else is playing, even from beyond the grave. She was teaching me. I spent my lunch break at the bank, working with a financial advisor to understand exactly what I'd inherited. The $2 million was just the liquid assets. There were also investment accounts, bonds, and a small rental property portfolio that generated steady monthly income. I was, by any reasonable measure, wealthy. More importantly, I was wealthy enough to be financially independent for the rest of my life if I managed it properly. Armed with this knowledge, I started paying closer attention to David and his family's behavior. What I discovered over the next few weeks was illuminating. David, I noticed, always seemed stressed about money despite his decent salary. He'd make comments about his credit card bills, about needing to cut back on expenses, about hoping for a promotion. When we went out for dinner, he'd suggest less expensive restaurants with apologetic smiles, claiming he was watching his budget. I'd always found this endearing a sign that he was responsible and practical. Now I wondered if there was more to the story. During a family dinner at the Harrison house, I started listening differently to their conversations. Margaret would mention their upcoming country club dues with a slight edge to her voice. Robert would complain about property taxes and the unreasonable cost of maintaining their lifestyle. Stephanie would hint about needing help with her graduate school expenses. These weren't the casual complaints of people with plenty of money. These were the worried comments of people feeling financial pressure. After dinner, while David was helping his father with something in the garage, I found myself alone with Margaret in her pristine kitchen. She was loading their expensive dishwasher with the same careful precision she applied to everything else. "Nicole," she said without looking at me, "I hope you weren't too hurt by our conversation last week." I paused in my task of wrapping leftover dessert. Which part? I just want what's best for David. And for you, too, of course. The "of course" sounded like an afterthought. "What do you think would be best for me?" I asked carefully. Margaret finally looked up, her expression calculating. "Well, you seem like a practical girl. You must understand that marriage is a partnership in every sense, emotional, social, and financial. Of course, David has certain obligations, family expectations, a lifestyle to maintain." She closed the dishwasher and turned to face me. "Fully. It would be helpful if his wife could contribute meaningfully to those obligations." There it was. The real conversation we'd been dancing around for months. Contribute how? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Financially, of course. David mentioned you have some savings. He told you about my savings." The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Margaret's smile was razor thin. "Families don't have secrets from each other, dear. David said you've been quite frugal over the years." Very sensible. My blood ran cold. David had been discussing my finances with his mother. The modest savings account I'd mentioned to him, the one that had taken me years to build up to a few $1,000s, had become a topic of family conversation. "I see," I said quietly. "I'm sure we could help you invest it more wisely." She continued. "Robert has some excellent connections. With the right guidance, you could really make that money work for both of you." Both of you, not me. Both of them. When David returned from the garage, I watched him differently. The way he glanced between his mother and me, trying to read the tension in the room. The way he immediately looked guilty when he met my eyes, as if he knew exactly what we'd been discussing. On the drive home, I was quiet while David filled the silence with nervous chatter about his father's golf game and his sister's latest drama with her thesis advisor. Finally, he fell silent and glanced over at me. "Everything okay? You seem distracted." "Your mother and I were talking about finances," I said casually. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Oh, she mentioned that you told her about my savings account." He stopped at a red light and looked genuinely uncomfortable. "It wasn't like that. She was just asking about our plans, about how we'd manage things after we're married." "And you thought my financial information was relevant to that conversation?" "Nicole, you're being dramatic. She's going to be family. And she has experience. With investments, she was just trying to help." "Help with what, exactly?" The light turned green and David accelerated perhaps a bit too quickly. "Help us plan for our future. Make smart decisions about combining our resources." Combining our resources. Not protecting my resources or respecting my privacy, but combining them, which I was beginning to understand, meant making them available to solve the Harrison family's problems. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, processing everything I'd learned. David and his family were struggling financially despite their appearances. They saw me not as a person to love and cherish, but as a potential solution to their money problems. My modest savings account, the one I'd been almost embarrassed to mention, had become a strategic asset in their family planning. If they were this interested in my few $1,000s in savings, how would they react if they knew the truth about my inheritance? The answer to that question was exactly what I needed to figure out. But first, I needed to understand just how bad their financial situation really was, and how far they were willing to go to get their hands on what they thought I had taught my grandmother had been right. Information was power, and I was just getting started gathering it. 2 weeks later, the financial picture became clearer when David left his laptop open on my kitchen table while he took a shower. I hadn't intended to snoop, but when his email pinged with a credit card payment reminder, the screen displayed enough to make my stomach drop. The outstanding balance was over $18,000. I stared at the notification, my mind racing. David made good money, not amazing, but certainly enough to live comfortably if he managed it well. $18,000 in credit card debt suggested either catastrophic financial mismanagement or expenses far beyond his income. When he emerged from the bathroom, hair damp and whistling cheerfully, I was sitting exactly where he'd left me, my expression carefully neutral. "Your laptop chimed," I said casually. "Looked like a payment reminder." David's face went pale as he rushed to close the laptop. "Yeah, just bills. Nothing important." $18,000 doesn't seem like nothing. He froze, his hands still on the laptop. For a moment, I thought he might be honest with me. Instead, he forced a laugh. "It sounds worse than it is. I've been consolidating some expenses, moving things around for better interest rates." That was such an obvious lie that I almost felt insulted. I worked with numbers every day at the library, budgets, acquisitions, cost analyses. I knew the difference between strategic financial planning and drowning in debt. "David," I said gently, "if you're having money problems, we should talk about it. We're supposed to be partners." For a moment, his mask slipped and I saw something vulnerable in his eyes. Then he shook his head and smiled that practiced smile I was beginning to recognize. "It's nothing I can't handle. Besides, once we're married, we'll have 2 incomes. Things will be easier." 2 incomes. There was again the expectation that my financial contribution would solve his problems. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing things I'd previously overlooked. The way David would suggest staying in instead of going out, claiming he preferred my cooking to restaurants. How he'd grown increasingly interested in my practical lifestyle choices. The frequency with which he brought up topics about shared finances and combined resources. The real revelation came during Sunday dinner at the Harrison house. When I excused myself to use the bathroom and overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. She's perfect for him, Margaret was saying in her kitchen, her voice carrying down the hallway. Responsible with money, no expensive tastes, and grateful enough to not ask difficult questions. The savings account isn't much, Robert replied. But it's something, and she'd keep working after the wedding. More importantly, she won't be a drain on resources like some wives, Stephanie chimed in. David needs someone who contributes, not someone who expects to be taken care of. My blood ran cold as I realized they were discussing me like a business transaction. How much debt does David have now? Margaret asked, her voice dropping. Between the credit cards and that loan he took out for the down payment on his condo, probably close to $40,000, Robert answered. Good thing Nicole's so understanding about money. $40,000. Not 18, 40. Well, she doesn't have much choice, does she? Margaret's laugh was sharp. It's not like she has other prospects. David's doing her a favor, really. I stood in their hallway, my hand on the bathroom door, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't love. This wasn't even affection. This was a calculated decision based on my perceived usefulness and lack of options. When I returned to the dining room, they all looked up with bright smiles, seamlessly returning to their performance of family warmth. David reached over to squeeze my hand. We were just talking about honeymoon destinations, he said. Mom thinks we should consider something domestic to save money. Very practical. I managed to say dot after dinner. As David helped his father with some household project, Margaret cornered me again. This time, her approach was more direct. Nicole, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you thought about contributing to the wedding expenses? I blinked. Contributing how? Well, traditionally, both families share the costs. I know your grandmother recently passed. I'm sorry for your loss. By the way, but perhaps she left you something that could help with the wedding? The audacity took my breath away. She was asking about my grandmother's estate while simultaneously dismissing me as unworthy of her family. Actually, I said carefully, my grandmother did leave me some things. Margaret's eyes lit up with interest. Oh, some family heirlooms, sentimental value mostly. I paused, watching her face fall slightly. Nothing particularly valuable. Of course, she said, but I could see the disappointment. Well, perhaps you could take on more of the smaller expenses. Flowers, invitations, that sort of thing. It would free up our budget for the more important elements. Translation, the things that would reflect well on the Harrison. Family name. That night, David and I had our first real fight about money. I told him I knew about his debt, all of it, and asked why he hadn't been honest with me. Because I knew you'd react like this, he said, his voice defensive. It's not a big deal, Nicole. Everyone has debt. It's normal. $40,000 in debt isn't normal, David. How did you... He stopped himself, running his hands through his hair. Look, it's under control. I have a plan. What plan? Once we're married, we'll combine our finances. Your savings, my income, we'll tackle it together. That's what married couples do. There it was laid out plainly. His plan was to use my money to solve his problems. What if I don't want to combine finances right away? I asked. David stared at me like I'd suggested we get married on Mars. What do you mean? I mean, what if I want to keep my own bank account, at least until we see how things work out? Nicole, that's not how marriage works. We're supposed to be a team. A team where I pay off your debt? It's not like that. But his tone suggested it was exactly like that. Then what is it like? David sat down heavily on my couch, suddenly looking exhausted. For a moment, I thought he might be honest with me about the pressure he was under, about his family's expectations, about the hole he'd dug himself into. Instead, he said, I thought you loved me. It was emotional manipulation, so obvious it would have been insulting if it hadn't been so sad. The man I'd fallen in love with, or thought I'd fallen in love with, was trying to guilt me into financing his mistakes. I do love you, I said quietly. But love doesn't mean I have to be financially responsible for choices I didn't make. So that's it? You're going to keep score? Keep track of what's yours and what's mine. I'm going to be careful, I said. the way my grandmother taught me to be. David's expression hardened at the mention of my grandmother. Your grandmother lived alone, Nicole? She died alone. Is that really the example you want to follow? The cruelty of that comment hit me like a slap. My grandmother had lived independently and died peacefully, surrounded by the love and respect of everyone who knew her. If David saw that as a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration, told me everything I needed to know about his values. Maybe, I said softly, living alone is better than living with someone who sees you as a solution to their problems rather than a person to love. David left angry that night, and I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about debt and manipulation and the casual cruelty of people who believed they were entitled to other people's resources. $40,000 of debt. A family that saw me as a convenient source of financial relief. A fiancé who thought love meant access to my bank account. They had no idea that I could pay off David's debt without even touching the principal of my inheritance. But they also had no idea that I was far more interested in their character than their problems, and what I was learning about their character was deeply troubling. The following Sunday's family dinner felt different. I arrived at the Harrison house with my usual bottle of moderately priced wine, but this time I was watching everything through new eyes. The perfectly manicured exterior, the expensive cars. In the driveway, the imported marble in the foyer. All of it suddenly looked like a carefully constructed facade hiding financial desperation. Margaret greeted me at the door wearing what had to be a $5,000 necklace, her jewelry, collection sparkling under the crystal chandelier. She made a point of adjusting it as she spoke, ensuring I noticed the impressive diamonds. Nicole, dear, you look lovely. Is that a new dress? I glanced down at my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to 3 previous family dinners. No, I'd had it for a while. Oh, her smile faltered slightly. Well, it's very practical. Practical. Her favorite word for anything I owned, wore, or suggested. David's father, Robert, was in the living room, scrolling through his phone with a frown. When he saw me, he quickly switched to a smile and shoved the device into his pocket. Nicole. How's the library treating you? Very well. Thank you. We just got approval for a new digital archive system. That's nice, he said, but his attention was already drifting. I noticed him glance toward the kitchen where Margaret was calling out instructions to David. About setting the table. Stephanie, David's sister, emerged from upstairs looking frazzled. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she seemed stressed about something. Hey, Nicole, she said distractedly. David, did you ask her yet? Ask me what? I looked between them. David shot his sister a warning look. Steph, we talked about this. Ask me what? I repeated. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Oh, nothing serious. Just a small family matter. The 3 of them exchanged glances, and I felt that familiar sensation of being on the outside of some private family discussion. It's about Stephanie's graduate program, David said finally. She's having some trouble with her funding. Stephanie's face reddened. It's not trouble exactly. The grant fell through for next semester, and the university doesn't offer payment plans for tuition. How much do you need? I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this conversation was heading. $12,000, Stephanie said quietly. I've applied for loans, but my credit isn't great because of some medical bills from last year. We're all trying to help, Margaret added quickly. Robert and I are doing what we can, and David thought, perhaps I could help. I finished. The room went quiet. I could practically feel their collective held breath. I know it's a lot to ask, David said, reaching for my hand. But you've always been so responsible with money. And Stephanie's education is important to all of us. Important to all of them, not necessarily to me. $12,000 is a significant amount, I said carefully. Oh, we wouldn't expect you to cover all of it, Margaret said quickly. Just whatever you're comfortable with. Even a few thousand would make such a difference. A few thousand. The exact amount they thought I had in savings. I looked around the room at their expectant faces. David's encouraging smile. Margaret's carefully controlled hopefulness. Robert's awkward attempt to look anywhere but at me, Stephanie's desperate embarrassment. "Can I think about it?" I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Of course," David said, "but—" His voice was strained. "Take all the time you need." During dinner, the conversation was stilted. Margaret kept steering the discussion toward financial responsibility and family loyalty. Robert made several comments about the importance of investing in education. Stephanie mentioned how grateful she'd be for any help, how she'd pay it back as soon as she could after graduation. I noticed other things too. The way Margaret winced slightly when Robert ordered another expensive bottle of wine with dinner. How Stephanie's phone kept buzzing with what looked like payment reminders based on her increasingly stressed expressions. The way David kept checking his own phone and frowning at whatever he was reading. After dinner, while the others were clearing the table, I found myself alone with Margaret in the living room. She was adjusting the family portrait that dominated the wall, the expensive oil painting that proclaimed their status to anyone who entered their home. "That's a beautiful painting," I said. "Thank you." It was commissioned for Robert's 50th birthday. The artist usually works with old European families, but he made an exception for us. She said this with obvious pride, as if the painter's exclusivity elevated their social standing. "It must have been expensive," I observed. Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Quality is always worth the investment." "Of course." I paused, studying the painting more closely. "Though I imagine maintaining this lifestyle requires careful financial planning." "We've been very fortunate," she said carefully. "I'm sure you have." I turned to face her directly. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "If your family is doing so well financially, why does Stephanie need help with her tuition?" For just a moment, Margaret's composed mask slipped. I saw a flash of something panic, maybe, or irritation at being questioned. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "even successful families face unexpected challenges. Robert's business had some setbacks this year, and we've had some unusual expenses." "What kind of setbacks?" "Nicole," her voice sharpened, "I don't think our private financial matters are really your concern." "They are if you're asking me to contribute my savings to solve them." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Margaret's perfectly manicured fingers gripped the back of the sofa. "We're not asking you to solve anything," she said coldly. "We're simply offering you the opportunity to help a family member in need." I thought that was the kind of person you were. There it was, the guilt trip, delivered with surgical precision. The implication that refusing to hand over my money would reveal some fundamental character flaw. "What kind of person do you think I am?" I asked. Margaret studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "Honestly, I think you're a practical woman who understands how fortunate she is to be marrying into a family like ours." The casual arrogance of that statement took my breath away. "Fortunate how?" "David could have chosen anyone," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she outlined what she clearly believed was an obvious truth. "He's handsome, successful, from a good family. You're a librarian from a modest background. Surely you recognize the opportunity this marriage represents for you." "What opportunity is that?" "Security, status, a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself." She gestured around the room with its expensive furnishings and designer touches. "This lifestyle doesn't come free, Nicole. It requires everyone to contribute according to their abilities. And my ability to contribute is financial, among other things, yes." Margaret's smile was sharp as glass. "David needs a wife who understands. That marriage is a partnership in every sense. Someone who's willing to invest in the family's success." "Invest my savings, you mean?" "Invest whatever you can to help us all succeed together." I stared at her, finally understanding the complete picture. I wasn't joining the Harrison family, I was being recruited to subsidize it. My modest savings account wasn't just useful to them. It was essential. What if I don't have as much saved as David thinks I do? I asked quietly. Margaret's expression hardened. "What do you mean? What if unexpected expenses came up?" Medical bills, car repairs, family emergencies. What if there isn't as much money available as everyone assumes? For a moment, I saw real fear in Margaret's eyes. Then anger. Nicole, if you've been misleading David about your financial situation, I haven't been misleading anyone about anything, I interrupted. But I'm curious about what would happen if the money you're all counting on wasn't there. Then we'd have a serious problem. Margaret said coldly. David appeared in the doorway at that moment, looking between his mother and me with obvious tension. Everything okay in here? He asked. We were just discussing family finances, I said. Pleasantly, David's face paled. Mom, we talked about taking things slowly. Did we? Margaret's voice was ice. Because it seems to me that Nicole has some questions about her commitment to this family. That's not what I said, isn't it? Margaret turned to face me fully, her mask of politeness finally slipping away. You're sitting in our home wearing our son's ring, planning to take our family name, and you're questioning whether you're willing to help when we need it. I'm questioning why you need it, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Margaret's face had gone rigid with barely controlled fury. I think, she said finally, we need to have a much more honest conversation about expectations. I agree, I said. Complete honesty sounds perfect. But as I looked around the room at the expensive art, the designer furniture, the crystal glasses, and the family who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding, I realized that honesty was the last thing the Harrison family actually wanted. They wanted my money and my gratitude. They wanted me to feel lucky to be chosen and willing to pay for the privilege. What they didn't want was for me to have options, opinions, or the financial independence to walk away. Too bad for them that I had all three. The week following that disastrous family dinner, things between David and me grew increasingly strained. He called less frequently, and when we did speak, our conversations felt stilted and careful. I could tell he was getting pressure from his family about my reluctance to contribute to Stephanie's tuition, but he was too proud or too cowardly to address it directly. Instead, he started dropping hints. Stephanie's really stressed about school, he'd mentioned casually. She's been looking into dropping out if she can't make the payments work. That would be such a shame, he'd add. She's so close to finishing her master's degree. Each comment felt like a gentle probe, testing whether I'd changed my mind about opening my wallet for his family's problems. I hadn't. The breaking point came on a Thursday when David showed up at my apartment unexpectedly, holding a garment bag and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. I brought you something, he said, kissing my cheek as he hung the bag on my closet door. What is it? Open it. I unzipped the bag and found a wedding dress beautiful, elegant, and obviously expensive. The kind of dress that belonged in the Harrison family wedding photos. David, it's lovely, but Mom picked it out, he said quickly. She wanted to make sure you had something appropriate for the ceremony. Appropriate. That word again. I looked at the price tag, still attached to the sleeve, and my stomach dropped. $4,000. This is a $4,000 dress. Mom got a good deal on it. Her friend owns a bridal boutique. Data I can't accept. This? Why not? I stared at him, wondering if he was genuinely confused or just pretending to be. Because it costs more than I make in 2 months. Because your mother chose it without asking me. Because accepting this feels like accepting that. My own taste and judgment aren't good enough for your family. David's face hardened. She was trying to do something nice for you, was she? Or was she making sure I looked the part in your family photos? Nicole, you're being paranoid. Am I? I pulled the dress out of the bag, holding up the elaborate beadwork and designer label. This isn't a gift, David. This is a costume. What's that supposed to mean? It means your mother is dressing me up to look like someone worthy of the Harrison family name. Someone who belongs in your social circle. Someone who won't embarrass you at the country club. David ran his hands through his hair. A gesture I'd learned meant he was frustrated and trying to find the right words to manage me. My family is trying to include you, he said finally. They're trying to make you feel welcome. By replacing everything about me that doesn't meet their standards, by helping you fit in. The words exploded out of him with more force than he'd intended, and in the silence that followed, we both realized what he'd just admitted. Fit in, I repeated quietly. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. I hung the dress back in the bag, my movements carefully controlled. That's exactly what you meant. Your family doesn't want to accept me as I am. They want to transform me into someone they can tolerate. Nicole, please. The venue I chose wasn't good enough, so your mother found a more expensive one. My dress ideas weren't sophisticated enough, so she bought me this. My job isn't prestigious enough, so I should be grateful for the opportunity to marry up. My savings aren't substantial enough, but they'll do until we can combine finances and make my money available to solve your family's problems. Each point I made hit David like a physical blow. He sat down heavily on my couch, looking defeated. It's not like that, he said weakly. What's it like then? They're just ... particular. They have certain expectations about what kind of woman you should marry, about maintaining family standards. And I don't meet those standards. David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally looked up at me, I saw something like guilt in his eyes. You could, he said softly. If you wanted to. If I wanted to change everything about myself. If you wanted to compromise, to be part of something bigger. There was that phrase again, something bigger. As if joining their family would automatically elevate me. As if I should be grateful for the opportunity to lose myself in their expectations. What if I like who I am? I asked. What if I don't want to change? David stared at me like I'd asked him to solve advanced calculus. The idea that I might not want to transform myself to please his family was clearly incomprehensible to him. Everyone has to make adjustments when they get married, he said finally. What adjustments are you making? That's different. How? I'm not the one fighting with my future in-laws. You mean, I'm not the one being accepted as I am. David stood up abruptly and started pacing my small living room. This is exactly what Mom was talking about. You're being difficult. I'm being difficult by having opinions about my own wedding dress. You're being difficult by refusing to appreciate what my family is trying to do for you. What are they trying to do for me, David? Give you opportunities. Include you in their world, make you part of something important. Make me useful, I corrected. There is a difference. That's not fair. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and opened my bank app, showing him the balance of my modest savings account. Is this why you're marrying me, David? Because I'm responsible with money? Because I'll contribute to the family finances without asking too. Many questions? David glanced at the phone screen, and I saw something flicker in his expression disappointment. Maybe that the number wasn't higher. I'm marrying you because I love you, he said, but it sounded rehearsed. Do you? Or do you love the idea of a practical wife who'll help solve your family's problems? Nicole, you're overthinking this. Am I? Then answer me this. If I lost my job tomorrow and couldn't contribute financially to this marriage, would your family still think I was good enough for you? The question hung in the air between us. David's silence was answer enough. I see, I said quietly. It's not about the money. It's exactly about the money. And the status, and having a wife who's grateful enough to never question why she's always the one being asked to change. I walked to my closet and carefully hung up the expensive wedding dress, the one that would make me look like a proper Harrison bride, the one that would ensure I fit seamlessly into their family photos and social expectations. I need some time to think, I said. About what? About whether I want to spend the rest of my life being molded into someone else's vision of who I should be. David left that night without the dress and without any real understanding of what had just happened between us. But I understood perfectly. The Harrison family had shown me exactly who they were and what they wanted from me. The expensive dress hanging in my closet was just the latest symbol of their need to transform me into someone worthy of their approval. What they didn't know was that I was already worthy and I had the bank balance to prove it. More importantly, I was starting to realize that their approval wasn't something I actually wanted anymore. The next morning, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Nicole, the one who had spent 3 years trying to earn the Harrison family's approval. I called in sick to work and spent the day conducting my own investigation. If they wanted to treat this relationship like a business transaction, I was going to approach it like one, and that meant getting all the facts. My first stop was a consultation with Harrison and Associates Private Investigation Services, a firm I'd found through a simple online search. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Detective Maria Santos was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes as I explained my situation. "You want me to investigate your fiancé's family finances?" She clarified. "I want to understand what I'm dealing with," I said. "They've made it clear that my financial contribution is important to them. I think I have a right to know why." "Fair enough. How deep do you want me to go?" "As deep as necessary. Credit reports, business records, property liens, anything that's public record." Detective Santos quoted me a fee that would have been prohibitive for the old Nicole, the one living paycheck to paycheck on a librarian's salary. The new Nicole, the one with a $2 million inheritance, barely blinked. "I'll need a few days," she said. "Maybe a week for a comprehensive report." "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere." While I waited for the investigation results, I started doing some research of my own. The Harrison family had always been active on social media, constantly posting photos from their various social events and family gatherings. I'd always found it a bit much, but now I studied those posts with different eyes. Robert Harrison's LinkedIn profile listed him as CEO of Harrison Financial Consulting, which sounded impressive until I started digging deeper. The company had no website, no employee listings, and no significant online presence beyond Robert's own social media post. Margaret's Facebook page was a carefully curated display of luxury expensive vacations, charity galas, designer purchases. But I noticed something interesting about the timeline. The lavish lifestyle posts had become less frequent over the past 2 years, and the vacations had shifted from European destinations to domestic trips. Stephanie's Instagram told an even more revealing story. Her posts from her early graduate school days showed a comfortable lifestyle, nice apartment, regular social outings, expensive textbooks purchased without apparent concern. But her recent posts had a different tone. She'd moved to a smaller, obviously cheaper apartment. Her meals out had shifted from trendy restaurants to casual coffee shops. The designer handbags had disappeared from her photos. David's social media presence was more restrained, but even there I could see signs of financial stress. His posts about work had taken on an increasingly desperate quality networking events, professional development seminars, mentions of exciting new opportunities. That suggested someone trying hard to advance his career. By Thursday, Detective Santos called with preliminary findings. "You were right to be suspicious," she said when I met her at her office. "The Harrison family is in significant financial trouble." She spread a folder of documents across her desk: credit reports, court filings, business records. "Robert Harrison's consulting business has been essentially defunct for 18 months, she began. "He lost his major clients after some kind of investment scandal. Nothing criminal that I could find, but enough to destroy his reputation in the industry." "What kind of scandal?" "He advised several clients to invest in a development project that went bankrupt. The clients lost millions. Word got around that his due diligence was inadequate." I stared at the documents, processing this information. David's father wasn't just struggling financially, he was professionally ruined. What about their house? Second mortgage. Then a third. They're currently about 6 months behind on payments. Detective Santos pulled out another document. "There's a foreclosure notice that was filed last month." My stomach dropped. They're losing their house? Unless they can come up with about $40,000 in back payments plus fees, yes, $40,000. The exact amount of David's debt that I'd overheard his parents discussing. "Margaret Harrison has maxed out multiple credit cards," Detective Santos continued. "She's also borrowed against her jewelry collection, that expensive necklace you mentioned. It's actually owned by a pawn shop now. She's making payments to keep it." The picture was becoming clearer and more devastating. By the minute. Stephanie Harrison's tuition problems are real, the detective added. But the $12,000 she needs for next semester is just the beginning. She's already behind on this semester's payments. The university has put a hold on her account.
What?
About David. Your fiancé is probably in the best shape of all of them, which isn't saying much. $43,000 in combined debt between credit cards and personal loans. His condo is underwater. He owes more than it's worth. He's been making minimum payments on everything for the past year. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the Harrison family's financial catastrophe. How long have they been hiding this? I asked. Based on the records, the problems started about 2 years ago and have been escalating rapidly. They've been very good at maintaining appearances. Very good indeed. They'd fooled me completely. There's one more thing, Detective Santos said, pulling out a final document. I found some interesting correspondence between Margaret Harrison and a wedding planner. I took the papers and read with growing shock. It was a detailed email chain about wedding venues, catering, flowers all for David's and my wedding. The budget discussed was over $70,000. They're planning a $70,000 wedding? I said faintly. We're planning. Look at the dates. This correspondence ended about 6 weeks ago when the planner demanded a substantial deposit. I flipped through the emails, seeing increasingly desperate attempts by Margaret to negotiate payment plans and delays. The final email from the wedding planner was polite but firm. No deposit, no services. They can't afford any of this, I said. No, they can't, but they were clearly hoping you could. I thought about my modest wedding planning binder, about my careful research into affordable venues and budget-friendly options. While I'd been trying to plan a wedding we could actually afford, Margaret had been designing a fantasy celebration that would bankrupt us all. There's something else you should know, Detective Santos said gently. I found some evidence that suggests this isn't the first time the family's looked for financial assistance through marriage. What do you mean? David's older brother, Marcus. He was engaged 2 years ago to a woman from a wealthy family. The engagement ended abruptly right around the time the family's financial problems started getting serious. I stared at her. You think they scared her off by asking for money? I think the Harrison family has a pattern of viewing marriage as a financial strategy rather than an emotional commitment. I left Detective Santos's office with a thick folder of evidence and a completely transformed understanding of my situation. The Harrison family wasn't just struggling financially, they were drowning. And they'd identified me as their lifeline, but their assessment of my resources was based on incomplete information. They thought I had a few $1,000s in savings. That could help with immediate expenses. They had no idea that I could solve all their problems without even touching the principle of my inheritance. The question was, did I want to? For 3 years, I've been trying to prove I was worthy of their acceptance. Now I understood that their acceptance was contingent on my usefulness to them. They didn't love me despite my modest background. They loved me because of it. Because they thought it made me grateful and manageable. As I drove home with the investigators, report in my passenger seat, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's letter, about her warnings regarding people who would try to make me feel small, about her advice to never accept less than I deserved. The Harrison family had shown me exactly who they were. Now it was time for me to show them who I really was, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. Armed with Detective Santos's report, I decided it was time to gather some first-hand evidence of my own. I'd always been good at blending into the background, a useful skill when you're a librarian, and apparently even more useful when you're investigating the family you're supposed to marry into. I bought a small digital recording device, the kind journalists use for interviews. Nothing dramatic or spy-like, just a simple tool to document conversations. My grandmother had always said that people's true character emerged when they thought no one important was listening. The Harrison family had certainly proven that theory correct. My first opportunity came that weekend when David invited me to Stephanie's graduate school social event, a cocktail party for students and faculty in her program. It was being held at a professor's house, and the whole Harrison family would be there to support Stephanie. what they were really there to do, I suspected, was network with people who might have money to lend or opportunities to offer. I arrived at the party wearing a simple black dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings, carrying a small clutch that concealed the recording device. David met me at the door, looking handsome but stressed. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't miss it." But I could tell he was nervous about something. As we walked into the professor's elegantly appointed home, I understood why. This was exactly the kind of academic social event where the Harrison family's financial problems might become obvious to people who mattered in Stephanie's career. Margaret was already working the room, her expensive jewelry glittering under the soft lighting. She positioned herself near a group of older faculty members, laughing at their jokes with the practiced charm of someone who knew how to make useful connections. Robert was talking business with a man I didn't recognize, using hand gestures that suggested he was trying to sell someone on an idea. His voice carried across the room with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who needed a yes. Stephanie looked genuinely happy for the first time in weeks, surrounded by her fellow graduate students and discussing her research with animated excitement. This is her world, where she belonged based on her intelligence and hard work rather than her family's financial status. I found a quiet corner near a bookshelf and activated the recording device in my purse, then began circulating through the party. What I heard over the next 2 hours was illuminating. Margaret, to the department chair, "Stephanie is so dedicated to her studies. We're just heartbroken that funding issues might force her to take a break from her education. In our family, we believe education is an investment worth any sacrifice." The subtext was clear. They were hoping the university might find additional funding or offer a payment plan for a deserving student whose family was willing to sacrifice for education. Robert to another parent. The consulting business has been transitioning to a new model. Smaller, more exclusive client base. Sometimes you have to take a step back to position yourself for bigger opportunities. Translation: his business had failed, but he was trying to spin it as a strategic decision. David, to one of Stephanie's professors, "Nicole and I are planning our wedding for next year. She's been so practical about the budget, she really understands the value of financial responsibility." Even here at his sister's academic event, he was talking about my supposed financial virtues to someone who might remember that information later. But it was a conversation I overheard between Margaret and another mother that really opened my eyes. "Your daughter is so fortunate to have family support," the woman said to Margaret. "Graduate school is such a financial burden these days. We do what we can," Margaret replied smoothly. "Though between you and me, we're hoping David's fiancé might be able to contribute something. She's been very responsible with her savings, and family should help family, don't you think?" "Oh, absolutely. Is she from a wealthy family?" Margaret's laugh was carefully modulated. "Not wealthy, exactly, but very practical. Sometimes practical people are better with money than those who've always had it." I nearly choked on my wine. Margaret was basically telling this stranger that I was their family's financial backup plan, while simultaneously suggesting that my practical background made me a better source of money than actual wealthy people. Later in the evening, I found myself in the kitchen helping to refill appetizer trays when Robert and another man came in to get more ice. They were deep in conversation and didn't notice me at first. "The problem is timing," Robert was saying. "We need about $50,000 to get through the next 6 months, but all our credit lines are maxed out. What about family? Adult children? David's getting married soon. His fiancée seems like she might be willing to help, but we're not sure how much she has access to." Well, if she's marrying into the family, her money becomes family money eventually, right? That's the hope. Margaret thinks the girl is grateful enough that she won't ask too many questions about how the money gets used. They grabbed their ice and headed back to the party, leaving me frozen by the refrigerator. They were talking about my inheritance money. They didn't even know I had, like it was already theirs. The final revelation came near the end of the evening when I was using the bathroom and overheard Margaret and Stephanie talking in the hallway outside. "Mom, I feel terrible about asking Nicole for money," Stephanie was saying. She works so hard for what she has. Sweetheart, David is giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. Marrying into our family will open doors for her that she could never access on her own. The least she can do is show some gratitude by helping when we need it. But $12,000 is probably everything she has saved. Then she'll learn to save again. Nicole seems like the type who's good at living within her means. Besides, once she's married to David, she'll have access to family resources.
It all works out.
Family resources? Resources that, based on Detective Santos' report, didn't actually exist. I returned to the party and spent the rest of the evening observing the Harrison family with new eyes. They moved through the room like actors playing roles: the successful businessman, the socially connected wife, the supportive parents of a promising graduate student. But underneath the performance, I could see the desperation. Every conversation was a fishing expedition for opportunities, connections, or assistance. Every smile was calculated to maintain relationships that might prove useful later. Every casual mention of their family's values or David's upcoming marriage was designed to position me as a willing financial contributor to their lifestyle. On the drive home, David was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked, just thinking about what Professor Williams said about Stephanie's research. She's really brilliant, you know? She is. It would be such a shame if she couldn't finish her degree because of money. It would. David glanced over at me. "Have you given any more thought to helping her out? Even a few thousand would make a huge difference." I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, thinking about everything I'd heard that evening. About being discussed like a financial asset rather than a person. About their assumptions regarding my gratitude and willingness to contribute to their problems. "I'm still thinking about it," I said. "What's there to think about?" "She's going to be your sister-in-law. I'm thinking about what kind of family I'm marrying into." David was quiet for the rest of the drive, but I could feel his tension. He was starting to realize that I wasn't the grateful, malleable woman they'd all assumed I was. What he didn't realize was that I was about to become something much more interesting. A woman with options, information, and the financial independence to use both. The recording device in my purse had captured enough evidence to confirm everything Detective Santos had discovered. The Harrison family saw me as a solution to their financial problems, not as a person deserving of love and respect. Now, it was time to show them the difference between those two things. Monday morning found me sitting in the offices of Peterson and Associates, one of the city's most respected family law firms. I'd made the appointment after spending Sunday listening to the recordings from Stephanie's party, each conversation confirming what I already knew. The Harrison family viewed my financial resources as communal property. Attorney Rebecca Peterson was a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and an aura of competence that immediately put me at ease. She listened to my story without judgment, occasionally taking notes as I explained my situation. "Let me make sure I understand," she said when I finished. "You're engaged to a man whose family is in serious financial trouble. They're pressuring you to contribute your savings to their expenses. And you recently inherited a substantial amount of money that they don't know about." "That's correct." "And you're concerned about protecting your assets. I'm concerned about a lot of things. But yes, asset protection is part of it." Attorney Peterson leaned back in her chair, studying me thoughtfully. "Nicole, I have to ask, you planning to go through with this marriage?" The question hung in the air between us. I'd been avoiding asking it of myself directly, but hearing it from someone else forced me to confront the reality I'd been dancing around. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with first. That's wise." 2. Many people make major financial decisions based on emotion rather than facts. She pulled out a legal pad and pen. "Let me explain your options." For the next hour, Attorney Peterson walked me through the complexities of prenuptial agreements, asset protection strategies, and the legal implications of marriage in our state. "The most important thing to understand," she explained, "is that marriage creates certain legal obligations and assumptions about shared property. If you marry without proper legal protections, Your inheritance could potentially become marital property, especially if you commingle it with joint accounts or use it for joint expenses. What if I keep it completely separate? That helps, but it's not foolproof. If your husband's debts become unmanageable, creditors might still be able to make claims against family assets. And if you use any of the inheritance money for household expenses, vacations, or other joint activities, you could inadvertently convert separate property into marital property. The complexity of it all was overwhelming, but Attorney Peterson's next suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity. Before you make any decisions about marriage, I'd recommend conducting what I call a financial honesty test. Present your fiancé with a prenuptial agreement that protects their current assets, the savings account he knows about. See how he and his family react. What would that accomplish? It would tell you whether they're marrying you or marrying your money. If David truly loves you for who you are, he should be willing to sign an agreement that protects the modest savings he thinks you have. If his family objects to a prenup that protects a few $1,000s, imagine how they'd react to protecting $2 million. The elegance of this approach took my breath away. It was a perfect test of character and motives. What should the prenup include? Standard provisions protecting premarital assets, limiting spousal support, and keeping debt separate. We'd also include a clause stating that any financial gifts to family members must be agreed upon by both parties. Attorney Peterson smiled grimly. That last clause tends to reveal a lot about people's true intentions. How long would it take to prepare something like that? I could have a draft ready by Thursday. Nothing complicated, just a straightforward document protecting your known assets. And if they refuse to sign it, then you have your answer about what this marriage really means to them. I left Attorney Peterson's office with a consultation fee that represented less than an hour's interest on my inheritance, and a plan that felt both strategic and fair. If David and his family could accept a prenup protecting my modest savings, it would suggest that their feelings for me went beyond my financial utility. If they see OULDN single quotes T.well, that would tell me everything I needed to know. That evening, David came over for dinner at my apartment. I had made his favorite meal pasta with homemade sauce and garlic bread and opened a bottle of wine. Everything about the evening was designed to be comfortable and non-threatening. After dinner, as we sat on my couch with the last of the wine, I brought up the subject that had been weighing on my mind. David, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I think we should consider a prenuptial agreement. David's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. A prenup? Why? Well, we've been talking a lot about finances lately, and I think it would be smart to clarify expectations before we get married. Nicole, prenups are for rich people who don't trust each other. We don't need something like that. Actually, I think we do. You have debt, I have savings. A prenup would protect both of us by keeping those things separate. David set down his wine glass and turned to face me fully. What exactly are you trying to protect? My savings account. The one your mother keeps asking about. You want to protect a few $1,000s from your own husband. The way he said. It made my financial caution sound petty and selfish, but I pressed on. I want to make sure we're both clear about what belongs to whom. Don't you think that's fair? I think it's insulting. David's voice was rising slightly. I'm not some gold digger trying to steal your money, Nicole. I never said you were. But your family seems very interested in my financial contributions to their problems. That's different. That's about helping family members in need. With money that would be protected by a prenup. David was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see him working through the implications. So if Stephanie needs help with tuition, you just say no because of some legal document? I'd say that major financial decisions should be made by both spouses together, not imposed by one spouse's family. This is ridiculous. David stood up and started pacing my small living room. My family isn't trying to impose anything. They're asking for help. They're assuming I'll provide help. There's a difference. And a prenup would let you refuse to help my sister get an education. A prenup would ensure that help, if given, would be a choice rather than an obligation. David stopped pacing and stared at me. I can't believe you're being this selfish. I'm being practical. You know, that quality your family supposedly admires about me, this isn't practical, it's paranoid. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out the business card Attorney Peterson had given me. I've already spoken to a lawyer. She can draft something simple and fair that protects both our interests. David looked at the business card like it was a snake. You went to a lawyer without talking to me first? I'm talking to you now. After, you already made the decision. I made the decision to explore options. I'm asking for your input on whether to pursue them. David sat back down, running his hands through his hair in that gesture I learned meant he was trying to find the right words to manage me. Nicole, I love you. I want to marry you. But this prenup thing makes me feel like you don't trust me. Do you trust me? Of course I do. Then you should be willing to sign a document that protects the assets I had before we met. It's not about the money, then signing shouldn't be a problem. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was troubled. I need to talk to my family about this, and there it was. The confirmation I'd been expecting. David couldn't make a decision about our prenup, about our marriage without consulting the people who had financial expectations of me. Of course you do, I said quietly. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm starting to understand that. This marriage isn't just between you and me. It's between me and your whole family's financial needs. David left that night without kissing me goodbye, and I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about trust, love, and the difference between the two. If David truly loved me for who I was, he would sign a prenup protecting a few $1,000s without needing to consult anyone. If his family's financial desperation was driving this relationship, they would find reasons why such protection was unfair, unreasonable, or unnecessary. Either way, I was about to get the answer to a question I should have asked a long time ago. What was I really worth to the man I'd planned to marry? The call came on Wednesday evening, 2 days after I'd mentioned the prenup to David. Margaret Harrison's voice on the phone was colder than I'd ever heard it. Nicole, dear, we need to have a family meeting. Can you come to dinner on Friday? There are some things we need to discuss. A family meeting. Not a dinner invitation, not a social gathering. A meeting to address the problem I created by suggesting legal protection for my modest savings. Of course, I said. What time should I be there? 6 o'clock. And Nicole? Please bring that lawyer's business card you mentioned to David. The line went dead before I could respond. I spent Thursday working with Attorney Peterson to finalize the prenuptial agreement. It was, as she'd promised, straightforward and reasonable. The document protected my savings account, kept our debts separate, and required mutual consent for any financial gifts to family members exceeding $500. Remember, Attorney Peterson said as she handed me the printed document, this is a completely standard agreement. Any reasonable person would find these terms fair. And if they don't find them fair, then they're not reasonable people, and you should proceed accordingly. Friday evening arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove to the Harrison house. I parked behind David's car and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The document in my purse felt like it weighed 100 pounds, Margaret answered, the door-wearing expression that could have frozen fire. Nicole, come in. The entire family was assembled in the living room: Robert, Margaret, David, and Stephanie. They'd arranged themselves like a tribunal, with me clearly designated as the defendant. David wouldn't meet my eyes as I entered the room. Please sit, Margaret said, gesturing to a single chair facing the couch where the rest of the family had positioned themselves. I sat down and placed my purse carefully at my feet, the prenup tucked safely inside. David tells us you want him to sign some sort of legal document, Robert began without preamble. A prenuptial agreement, yes. Why? Margaret's voice was sharp. To protect both our interests and clarify financial expectations before marriage. What interests need protecting? Stephanie asked. She looked genuinely confused, as if the idea of financial self-preservation was foreign to her. My premarital assets? David's premarital debts. It's standard practice. Standard for people who don't trust each other, Margaret said coldly. Standard for people who want to be clear about expectations, I countered. Robert leaned forward. In his chair, Nicole, let me be frank with you. This prenup idea suggests you're not fully committed to becoming part of this family. How do you figure that? Marriage is about joining lives completely, Margaret interjected. What's mine is his. What's his is mine. This document you're proposing goes against the very nature of marriage. I looked around the room at their faces unified, in disapproval, presenting a solid front against my reasonable request for legal protection. Can I ask you something? I said. If I had millions of dollars instead of a few thousand, would you feel the same way about prenups? The question clearly caught them off guard. Margaret and Robert exchanged glances. That's a hypothetical, Margaret said finally. Is it? Because the principle is the same. Either marriage means complete financial transparency and sharing, or it doesn't. The amount shouldn't matter. Of course the amount matters, Robert said. We're talking about a few $1,000s that you've saved. In the context of a marriage, that money would be better used for joint goals paying down David's debts, contributing to household expenses, helping family members when needed, like Stephanie's tuition, like any family need that arises. Margaret said firmly. David finally spoke up. Nicole, I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. We're going to be married. Your money will help both of us. How will my money help both of us if it goes to pay off debts you incurred before we met? Because my financial health affects our marriage, he said, as if explaining something obvious to a child, and my financial security doesn't. You'll have financial security by being married to David, Margaret said. You'll have access to family resources, family connections, family support. I almost laughed at that. Based on Detective Santos's report, the Harrison family resources consisted mainly of debt and desperate attempts to maintain appearances. What if I said the prenup was non-negotiable? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then we'd have to question whether this marriage is right for our family, Margaret said finally. Your family or David? David is part of this family, Robert said. We support each other. That's what families do. And you're asking me to support all of you financially? We're asking you to be part of the family, Stephanie said, to contribute like everyone else. What does everyone else contribute? Another uncomfortable silence. We're not here to justify our family dynamics to you, Margaret said coldly. We're here to discuss whether you're truly ready to commit to this marriage. I reached into my purse and pulled out the prenuptial agreement, placing it on the coffee table between us. This is the document I'm asking David to sign. Please read it and tell me what you find unreasonable. Robert picked up the papers and began reading, his frown deepening with each page. He handed it to Margaret, who scanned it quickly before passing it to David. This protects your savings account, David said, looking up from the document. Yes, it keeps our debts separate. Yes, and it requires both our signatures for any financial gifts over $500. That's correct. Margaret's face had gone white with fury. This document would prevent you from helping Stephanie with her tuition. It would require David's agreement before I could help Stephanie with her tuition. And if he agreed but you didn't want to help, then we'd need to discuss why we disagreed and find a compromise. Or you could just say no, Robert said accusingly. Yes, I could say no. Just like David could say no if I wanted to spend our money on something he didn't approve of. This is outrageous, Margaret said, throwing the document back onto the coffee table. You're essentially holding David's family hostage to your whims. I'm asking for the same financial autonomy that David would have. David doesn't need financial autonomy from his wife, she snapped. David needs a partner who supports his family's well-being. And I need a partner who respects my right to make decisions about my own money. David finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't love or understanding, it was resentment. Nicole, if you loved me, you'd trust me with this. If you loved me, you'd respect my need for protection. Protection from what? From me? Protection from becoming financially responsible for problems I didn't create. The honesty of that statement hit the room like a physical blow. So that's what you think of us, Margaret said quietly. We're problems you didn't create. Your financial situation is a problem I didn't create, I clarified, but it's a problem I'm being asked to solve. We're not asking you to solve anything, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? Stephanie needs $12,000. For tuition, you have $43,000 in debt. Your parents are facing foreclosure, and somehow my savings account has become the solution to all of these issues. The accuracy of my information clearly shocked them. Robert's face went red. How do you know about... I did my research, I said simply. The same way you've been researching my financial resources. Margaret stood up abruptly. I think this conversation is over. Is it? Because I haven't gotten an answer about the prenup? David looked around the room at his family's faces, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I won't sign it. Why not? Because I don't want to start our marriage with legal barriers between us, and I don't want to start our marriage with financial expectations I never agreed to. And maybe, Margaret said with ice-cold precision, we should all consider whether this marriage is the right choice for anyone involved. I stood up and picked up the prenup from the coffee table, folding it carefully and putting it back in my purse. Maybe we should, I said. David followed me to the door, catching my arm as I reached for the handle. Nicole, please, can't we work this out? I really looked at him, and saw a man who'd been willing to sacrifice my financial security for his family's needs without ever asking my permission. I don't think we can, I said quietly, because we want different things from this marriage. What do you want? I want a partner who sees me as a person, not a bank account. That's not fair, isn't it? I opened the door and stepped out into the cold evening air. Goodbye, David. I drove home in silence, my engagement ring feeling heavy on my finger. The Harrison family had failed their test completely, revealing themselves to be exactly what I'd suspected. People who valued my financial utility more than my worth as a human being. But I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close, because they still didn't know what they'd actually lost, and I was about to make sure they understood exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. The weekend after the disastrous family meeting, I sat in my apartment staring at my engagement ring and processing what had just happened. David had chosen his family's financial needs over my reasonable request for protection. The Harrisons had revealed their true colors with stunning clarity, but I wasn't satisfied with just walking away. They'd spent months treating me like a convenient solution to their problems, dismissing my worth while calculating my usefulness. I wanted to understand the full scope of what they'd been planning. Monday morning found me back in Detective Santos's office, this time with a more specific request. I want to know everything, I told her. How deep does this go? How long have they been planning to use me financially? What exactly were they expecting from this marriage? Detective Santos leaned back in her chair, studying me with interest. That's a more complex investigation. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I'm sure. It might be expensive. Money isn't an issue. Over the next week, Detective Santos dove deeper into the Harrison family situation. What she uncovered was both shocking and sadly predictable. The planning goes back almost to the beginning of your relationship, she reported when we met the following Friday. I found email correspondence between Margaret Harrison and a financial planner from about 6 months after you and David started dating. She handed me printed emails that made my stomach turn. Margaret to financial advisor, David's new girlfriend seems very responsible with money. She works at the library and lives modestly. We're hoping she might be willing to help with some family financial challenges when the relationship gets more serious. Financial advisor response. How substantial are her resources? Margaret, unknown at this point, but she appears to live well below her means. Even modest savings could help with immediate needs. Long term, a working spouse with no expensive habits would significantly improve David's debt-to-income ratio. I stared at the emails, feeling sick. They'd been evaluating my financial potential before I'd even met most of David's family. There's more, Detective Santos said gently. Margaret Harrison has been tracking your spending patterns. What do you mean? She's been noting things you've purchased, restaurants you've chosen, clothes you've worn. She's been building a profile of your financial habits and estimated income. Detective Santos showed me a handwritten notebook that had somehow been photographed. In Margaret's precise script were observations dating back over a year. Nicole chose the less expensive wine at dinner shows financial discipline. Apartment rent is probably around $800 a month based on the neighborhood she drives a 2014 Honda paid off, well-maintained. Suggests she buys sensibly mentioned, saving for vacation, indicates discretionary income. The clinical nature of the observations was chilling. Margaret had been studying me like a specimen, cataloging evidence of my financial responsibility and estimating my usefulness to their family. How did you get this? I asked. Margaret left it in her car when she took it to be serviced. The mechanic is, let's say he's helped me with other cases. Detective Santos pulled out another folder. But the really interesting stuff is the families. Communication about wedding expenses. The documents in this folder told a story of breathtaking entitlement and financial fantasy. Email chains between Margaret and various wedding vendors showed her planning a celebration that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Margaret to wedding planner. The bride's family will be handling the majority of expenses. Please proceed. With the premium package. Wedding planner, wonderful. When can we expect the first deposit? Margaret. The bride is still finalizing her financial arrangements. She's being very careful about accessing her savings, but we expect resolution soon. There are contracts for venues, caterers, florists, and photographers, all contingent on deposits that Margaret clearly expected me to provide. The total came to over $90,000. $90,000? I said faintly. They were planning your dream wedding, Detective Santos said dryly. Or rather, their dream wedding that you would pay for. But the most damning evidence was a series of text messages between Margaret and David from 2 weeks before I mentioned the prenup. Margaret, any progress on getting Nicole to commit to helping Stephanie? David, she's still thinking about it. I think she's worried about having enough money left for our wedding. Margaret, she needs to understand that family comes first. Maybe explain that Stephanie's education is an investment in all our futures. David, I'll try, but she's been asking more questions about money lately. Margaret. Questions like what, David? About our family's finances. About my debt. I think someone might have told her something. Margaret, handle it. We can't afford for her to get cold feet now. David, what if she finds out about the house? Margaret, she won't. And even if she does, by then you'll be married and it won't matter. I read the messages twice, feeling my anger build with each exchange. They'd been actively strategizing about how to manipulate me, how to keep me in the dark about their true financial situation until after the wedding when my money would be legally accessible to them. There's one more thing, Detective Santos said quietly. I found evidence of previous attempts. Previous attempts at what? Finding financial solutions. Through marriage. David's brother, Marcus, the one I mentioned before, there's a pattern. She showed me more documents, these dating back 3 years. Marcus Harrison had been engaged to a woman named Jennifer Walsh, daughter of a successful restaurant owner. The engagement had lasted 8 months before ending abruptly. Jennifer Walsh's father filed a police report, Detective Santos explained. Apparently, Margaret Harrison had approached him about a business investment opportunity that would have given the Harrison family access to his restaurant's profits. When he declined and started asking questions about their financial stability, the engagement ended within a week. They tried this before. They've been trying variations of this for years. Marcus is now living across the country and doesn't speak to his family. Stephanie's previous boyfriend broke up with her after Margaret asked him to co-sign for a loan. The Harrison family has a pattern of viewing romantic relationships as potential solutions to their financial problems. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of their manipulation. This wasn't just about taking advantage of me. It was a systematic approach to using emotional relationships for financial gain. What happens now? I asked. That depends on what you want to accomplish. I thought about David's text messages too. His mother, about the notebook tracking my spending habits. About the $90,000 wedding they planned using money I didn't know I was supposed to provide. I want them to understand exactly what they lost when they chose to see me as a bank account instead of a person. Detective Santos smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Now, that sounds like a plan I can help with. What did you have in mind? Well, they still think you're just a librarian with a few $1,000s in savings. They have no idea about your inheritance. That information asymmetry gives you significant power. Power to do what? Power to show them exactly how expensive their greed actually was. I left Detective Santos's office with a file full of evidence and a growing sense of purpose. The Harrison family had spent 2 years treating me like Mark, studying my habits, planning my financial exploitation, and counting money that was never theirs to claim. They had no idea that the quiet librarian they'd so carefully manipulated was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my grandmother's letters spread out on my kitchen table, surrounded by Detective Santos's investigation files. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I could hear Elena's voice, clearly guiding me toward what needed to happen next. When those people show their true colors, you'll be grateful to have options. I had options now, more options than the Harrison family could possibly imagine. I opened my laptop and began crafting an email that would change everything. But first, I needed to retrieve one more piece of evidence from my grandmother's safety deposit box. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank and accessed box 247 one more time. Hidden behind the family photographs was a folder I barely glanced at during my first visit. Legal documents from my grandmother's immigration to the United States. In the 1950s, Elena Martinez hadn't just been careful with money. She'd been strategic about building wealth in a country that didn't always welcome people like her. The documents told the story of a woman who arrived with nothing and built a small empire through intelligence, determination, and careful investment. There were property deeds, stock certificates, and business partnership agreements dating back decades. My grandmother hadn't just saved money she'd owned apartment buildings, had partnerships in 3 different businesses, and had been quietly investing in technology stocks since the 1980s. The $2 million I'd inherited was just the liquid portion of her estate. The full value of what she'd left me was closer to $4 million. I sat in the bank's private viewing room, holding documents that proved my grandmother had been one of the most successful businesswomen in the city, operating entirely under the radar while living in her modest house and clipping coupons. She'd hidden her wealth not out of shame, but out of wisdom. She'd understood that money made you a target, that people would treat you differently if they knew what you had. She'd lived authentically while building an empire in secret. Just like I was about to do. I drove home and spent the afternoon crafting the perfect response to David's text message that had been sitting unanswered on my phone since Friday. Can we please talk? I miss you. Instead of responding directly, I sent him a message that would set everything in motion. David, I've been doing some thinking about our relationship and our future. I'd like to meet with you and your family one more time. There are some things I need to share with all of you. Can we meet at your parents' house on Sunday? I have something important to discuss. His response came within minutes. Of course. Mom will be so happy. Should I ask her to make dinner? That would be lovely. And David? Please make sure everyone is there. Stephanie, too. This concerns the whole family. What's this about? You'll see on Sunday. I spent Saturday preparing for what would either be the most satisfying conversation of my life or a complete disaster. Either way, it was time for the Harrison family to understand exactly who they'd been dealing with. Sunday arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove to the Harrison house one final time. But this time, I wasn't the anxious woman seeking approval. I was someone with power, information, and the financial independence to use both. Margaret answered the door with a smile that seemed genuinely warm for the first time in months. Nicole, I'm so glad you called. We've all been hoping we could work things out. So have I said, and meant it, just not in the way she thought. The family was assembled in the living room, but the atmosphere was completely different from our last meeting. Instead of the tribunal setup, they'd arranged themselves casually, projecting warmth and welcome. David stood up to kiss my cheek, and even Stephanie smiled at me with what seemed like genuine affection. "Can I get you some wine?" Robert asked. "I opened that bottle you brought last time. That would be lovely." As Robert poured wine and Margaret bustled around arranging cheese and crackers, I noticed how different they all seemed. The desperation was still there underneath, but now it was masked by hope. They thought I'd changed my mind about the prenup. They thought I was ready to fall in line with their financial expectations. "So," Margaret said, settling into her chair with obvious satisfaction, "David said you had something important to discuss." "With all of us, I do." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "But first, I want to apologize for how I handled things last week." David's face lit up with relief. "Nicole, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I was scared and defensive, and I didn't communicate well." I looked around the room with their expectant faces. "The truth is, I haven't been completely honest with any of you." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked, but her tone was gentle, encouraging. "I mean, I've been hiding something about my financial situation." The room went completely silent. I could practically feel their collective held breath. When I said I was being careful with money, when I seemed reluctant to help with expenses, it wasn't because I couldn't afford to. It was because I was afraid of how you'd react if you knew the truth. "The truth about what?" David asked quietly. I opened the manila envelope and pulled out a bank statement, one that showed the current balance of my inheritance account. "The truth about my grandmother's estate." I handed the statement to David and watched his face go white. As he read the number at the bottom, "This says ... double..." He stopped blinking at the paper. "This says $4 million. 4.2 million, actually. But who's counting?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather. Clock ticking in the hallway, Margaret was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. $4 million? My grandmother was very successful in real estate and investments. She preferred to live modestly, but she was quite wealthy. Robert's wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble coffee table. Red wine spread across the surface like blood. "You've had $4 million this entire time?" Stephanie asked, her voice rising. "While we've been worried about my tuition. While David's been stressed about his debt. While my parents are facing foreclosure. I've had it for 3 months. Since my grandmother died." David was still staring at the bank statement like it might disappear if he looked away. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to understand what kind of people I was dealing with." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What's that supposed to mean?" Margaret asked, but her voice had lost its warmth. "It means I wanted to see if you'd love me for who I am, or if you'd love me for what I could provide." I reached into my purse again and pulled out Detective Santos' investigation report, the notebook with Margaret's observations about my spending habits, and printouts of the family's text messages about manipulating me. "I know about all of it," I said quietly. "The foreclosure, David's real debt total, Stephanie's tuition problems, Robert's failed business, the $90,000 wedding you were planning to have me pay for, the notebook where Margaret tracked my spending to estimate my usefulness to your family." I spread the documents across the coffee table, careful to avoid the spilled wine. "I know about Marcus's ex-fiancé and the business investment that ended their engagement. I know about Stephanie's ex-boyfriend and the co-signing request. I know that this family has a pattern of viewing romantic relationships as solutions to financial problems." The silence stretched on as they absorbed what I just revealed. Margaret's face had gone from pale to green. Robert was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Stephanie looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. David finally looked up from the bank statement, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't love or remorse, it was calculation. $4 million could solve all our problems, he said quietly. Not, "I'm sorry for lying to you." Not, "I should have been honest about my family's situation." Not, "I love you regardless of your money." $4 million could solve all our problems. "Yes," I said. "It could." Margaret leaned forward in her chair, her composure returning as the implications sank in. Nicole, this changes everything. Why didn't you trust us with this information from the beginning? Because I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought only had a few $1,000s. And how do you think we treated you? Robert asked. Defensively, I picked up Margaret's notebook and read from it. Nicole chose the less expensive wine at dinner show's financial discipline. Her apartment rent is probably around $800 a month. She drives a paid-off Honda suggests she buys sensibly. Margaret's face flushed red. You were just cataloging my financial habits to determine my usefulness to your family. I set the notebook down and picked up the printed text messages. David, would you like to read your conversation with your mother about how to manipulate me into helping Stephanie? Nicole, that's not what those messages. Handle it. We can't afford for her to get cold feet now, I read aloud. What if she finds out about the house? She won't. And even if she does, by then you'll be married and it won't matter. The words hung in the air like an accusation. You were planning to hide your family's foreclosure until after we were married, I continued. Until my money was legally accessible to you? It wasn't like that, David protested, but his voice was weak. What was it like then? David looked around the room at his family's faces, seeking support that wasn't coming. They were all too busy processing the magnitude of what they'd lost. We were trying to protect you from worrying about things you couldn't control, he said finally. You were trying to protect your access to my money. Stephanie finally spoke up, her voice small and ashamed. I never wanted you to feel pressured about my tuition. But you didn't object when your family decided to pressure me. I thought, she stopped, tears starting to form in her eyes. I thought you cared about me. I do care about you. But caring about someone doesn't mean becoming financially responsible for their choices and problems. Margaret stood up abruptly, her mask of civility finally slipping away completely. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You sat here for months, watching us struggle, knowing you could help, and you did nothing. I sat here for months watching you manipulate me, knowing you saw me as a bank account rather than a person. You could have solved everything. Stephanie's education, David's debt, our house. You could have saved this family. With money you thought I didn't have, but you do have it? Margaret's voice was rising toward hysteria. You have enough money to fix everything, and you're choosing not to help. I'm choosing not to be used. David finally set down the bank statement and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before cold, calculating resentment. So what happens now? He asked. You've proved your point. You've shown us up as the desperate family we are. What do you want from us? I want you to understand what you actually lost. We lost $4 million, Robert said bitterly. No, you lost someone who would have loved you enough to help if you'd been honest and respectful. You lost someone who would have paid off David's debt as a wedding gift if you treated me like family instead of a mark. You lost someone who would have supported Stephanie's education if you'd asked for help instead of trying to manipulate it out of me. The truth of what I was saying hit them like physical blows. Margaret sank back into her chair, her face crumpling as she realized the magnitude of their miscalculation. You would have helped us? Stephanie asked, her voice breaking. I would have done almost anything for people who truly loved and respected me. But we do, David started. No, you don't. You love what you thought I could provide. When you believed I only had a few $1,000s, you spent months trying to manipulate me into giving it up. When you found out I have millions, your first thought was how it could solve your problems. I stood up and gathered the documents, putting them back in my purse. You failed the test, David. All of you did. You chose financial manipulation over honesty, exploitation over respect, and greed over love. Nicole, please, Margaret said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely desperate. We can start over. We can do better. Can you? Because even now, even after everything I've shown you, you're not apologizing for how you treated me. You're not expressing regret for the lying and manipulation. You're asking for another chance to access my money. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face them one final time. My grandmother left me a letter with her inheritance. She warned me that people would try to make me feel small, that they'd judge my worth by what I could provide them. She told me I'd be grateful to have options when those people showed their true colors. I smiled, feeling Elena's strength flowing through me. She was right about everything, including the fact that I'd be grateful to have the option to walk away from people who couldn't see my value beyond my bank account. I pulled off my engagement ring and set it on the table next to the spilled wine. Goodbye, David. I hope you find what you're really looking for. As I walked to my car, I could hear voices rising from inside the house, arguments, recriminations, the sound of a family realizing they'd destroyed their own salvation through greed and manipulation. I drove home in silence, feeling lighter than I had in months. The Harrison family had taught me an invaluable lesson about my own worth, and I taught them an equally valuable lesson about the cost of treating people as financial resources rather than human beings. My grandmother would have been proud. The week following my revelation at the Harrison house was both the quietest and most eventful of my life. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from David and his family members, each message more desperate than the last thought David started. With anger, how could you lie to us for months? We thought you were someone we could trust, then moved to bargaining. Can we please talk? I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. Stephanie tried guilt. I thought we were friends. Friends don't let each other struggle when they could help. Margaret oscillated between fury and manipulation. You're a cruel person to watch a family suffer when you have the means to help followed. Hours later, I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone. Robert attempted logic. From a financial perspective, helping us would be an investment in David's future earning potential. I ignored them all. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after I'd walked out of their house, David showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as he stood in the hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly rehearsing what he planned to say. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Nicole, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all week. I know. We need to talk. No, we don't. David's face was haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him enter my apartment. He looked around the space, my modest furniture, my carefully chosen books, my simple life with new eyes. I've been thinking about everything he said. He began, and you're right, we handled things badly. That's one way to put it. David sat down heavily on my couch, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. But, Nicole, you have to understand the pressure we've been under. The stress, the worry about losing everything we've worked for. The everything you've worked for is mostly debt and illusions. That's not fair, isn't it? Your father's business failed because he gave bad advice to clients. Your mother has been living beyond your family's means for years. You've accumulated massive debt trying to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford. None of that is my responsibility. But you could help us start over. You could give us a chance to rebuild. There it was again, the assumption that my money should be available to solve their problems. David, do you love me? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Of course I love you. Do you love me or do you love what I can provide? That's not a fair question. It's the only question that matters. David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, I saw something desperate in his eyes. I love you, he said, but I also love my family. And yes, knowing that you could help them makes me hope that you will. Even though they spent months manipulating and lying to me, they were scared. People do stupid things when they're scared. Do they? Because I was scared, too scared of not being good enough for your family, scared of not fitting in, scared of being judged for my background. But I didn't lie or manipulate anyone. That's different. How? You weren't facing financial ruin. No, I was facing emotional manipulation and systematic attempts to undermine my self-worth, which in some ways is worse. David stood up and started pacing my small living room. Nicole, I know we made mistakes, but we can do better. I can do better. Can you? Because even now, you're not apologizing for how your family treated me. You're making excuses for it. I'm trying to explain, you're trying to justify it. There's a difference. David stopped pacing and faced me directly. What do you want from me? What would it take for you to forgive us? The question hung in. The air between us, what did I want from him? I want you to understand that what your family did was wrong. Not misguided, not understandable under the circumstances wrong. Okay, it was wrong. I want you to acknowledge that I had every right to protect myself financially from people who were lying to me about their motives. Fine, you had that right. And I want you to admit that your family saw me as a financial resource rather than a person deserving of love and respect. David's jaw tightened. That's not true, isn't it? Your mother kept a notebook tracking my spending habits. Your family planned a $90,000 wedding they expected me to pay for. Your father researched my estimated income to determine my usefulness. How is that not treating me like a financial resource? They were trying to understand what kind of life we could build together. They were trying to determine how much money they could extract from me. You're being unfair. Am I? David, answer me honestly. If I had told you from the beginning that I had $4 million, would your family have treated me differently? David opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. We both knew the answer. They would have been more respectful, he admitted finally. More respectful of my money, not more respectful of me. What's the difference? The question was so telling, so revealing of his fundamental misunderstanding of respect and love, that I almost felt sorry for him. The difference is everything, David. Respect for me means valuing my opinions, supporting my decisions, treating me as an equal partner. Respect for my money means being nice to me so you can access my resources. But we do respect you. Your mother called me unworthy of the Harrison family name when she thought I only had a few $1,000s. She was stressed. She was honest. For the first time in months, she was completely honest about how your family sees me. David sat back down, looking defeated. So what happens now? You just walk away from 3 years together? I walk away from 3 years of being evaluated for my usefulness rather than loved for who I am. And there's nothing I can do to change your mind? I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find any trace of the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. The man who'd seemed fascinated by my quiet world of books and stories. The man who'd made me feel like my work mattered, like I mattered. That man had either been an illusion, or he'd been gradually corrupted by his family's financial desperation and expectations. You could start by apologizing, I said quietly. I'm sorry, not to me, to yourself, for letting your family's financial problems turn you into someone who would lie to and manipulate the person you claim to love. David stared at me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar look of calculation. If I did that, if I apologized and meant it, would you consider helping us anyway? As a loan, maybe with proper documentation and interest? And there it was. Even in his attempt at contrition, even in his moment of supposed self-reflection, he was still trying to find an angle to access my money. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. Goodbye, David. Nicole, please. Goodbye. He left reluctantly, looking back over his shoulder as if he might say something else that would change my mind. But there was nothing left to say. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a profound sense of closure. The Harrison family had shown me exactly who they were, repeatedly and consistently. David had just confirmed that even faced with the complete truth about their behavior, he couldn't see past his family's financial needs to understand the damage they'd done to me. I made myself a cup of tea, the good kind my grandmother had taught me to appreciate, and sat down to write a letter. Not to David or his family, but to myself. A letter acknowledging what I'd learned, what I'd survived, and what I gained from this painful experience. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones. The Harrison family had taught me exactly what I was worth and exactly what I deserved. And I deserved so much more than they had ever been willing to offer. The weekend after David's final visit, I did something I hadn't done in months. I enjoyed my own company. I slept in, made elaborate breakfasts, and read books without checking my phone every few minutes. The constant buzz of Harrison family messages had finally stopped, leaving me in blessed silence, but Monday brought a different kind of communication. Certified letter delivered to my apartment. Inside was a formal document from Harrison and Associates Legal Services, no relation to Robert's failed consulting business. Apparently, the letter was from Margaret Harrison, written in language clearly crafted by an attorney. Dear Ms. Lima, recent events have brought to our attention certain misunderstandings regarding financial expectations and family obligations. While we regret any confusion that may have occurred, we believe a reasonable resolution can be reached that benefits all parties. Given your substantial resources and our family's current challenges, we propose a mutually beneficial arrangement. The letter went on to outline a proposal that was breathtaking in its audacity. The Harrison family was offering to allow me to rejoin their family in exchange for payment of David's debt, $43,000, coverage of Stephanie's remaining tuition, $24,000 for 2 semesters, assistance with their mortgage arrears, $47,000, family investment fund for future needs, $50,000. In return, they would graciously forgive my deception about my financial resources and welcome me back into their family circle. The total they were requesting was $164,000 more than most people made in 3 years, presented as a reasonable compromise that demonstrated their willingness to start fresh. I read the letter twice, then called Attorney Peterson. They're treating your inheritance like a business negotiation, she said after I read her the proposal. This is actually legally problematic for them. How so? They're essentially attempting to extort money from you in exchange for a relationship. Depending on how this escalates, it could constitute harassment or even attempted fraud. What should I do? Document everything. Keep all communications. And under no circumstances should you respond to this proposal. What if they escalate? Then we'll address it legally. But Nicole, I want you to understand something. This letter proves you made the right decision. People who truly love you don't send you invoices for the privilege of their affection. That afternoon, I was back at work for the first time since the confrontation, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of library life. I was helping a patron find books on financial literacy when my coworker Sarah approached my desk. Nicole, there's someone here to see you. She says she's David's sister. I looked up to see Stephanie standing near the entrance, looking nervous and out of place among the stacks. She was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected any family contact to come through David or Margaret. Can you cover for me for a few minutes? I asked Sarah Dot. I walked over to Stephanie, who looked like she'd been crying. Hi, she said quietly. Hi, can we talk? Somewhere private? I led her to one of the small study rooms we used for patron consultations. Stephanie sat down, heavily in one of the chairs, her hands twisting in her lap. I wanted to apologize, she said without preamble. For what? For all of it. For letting my family use my tuition problems to manipulate you. For not speaking up when I saw what they were doing. For being part of something that was wrong. Her. Words seemed genuine, but I'd learned to be cautious about Harrison family sincerity. Why are you here, Stephanie? Because I can't live with myself knowing what we did to you. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. You were kind to me from the beginning. You listened to me talk about my research. You remembered things that were important to me. You treated me like a person instead of just David's little sister. You are a person, and you deserve to be treated that way. But we didn't treat you that way, did we? Her voice broke. We treated you like a solution to our problems. And when you turned out to have more money than we dreamed of, we treated you like a lottery ticket we'd somehow lost. I sat down across from her, studying her face. Unlike David's practiced expressions and Margaret's calculated charm, Stephanie's distress seemed completely authentic. Did your family send you here? God, no. They'd kill me if they knew I was talking to you. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They sent you that awful letter, didn't they? You knew about the letter? Mom showed it to me before she sent it. I told her it was horrible, that it would only make things worse. But she said you needed to understand the financial realities of family relationships. What did you tell her? I told her that you understood those realities perfectly. That's why you left. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the study room, I could hear the normal sounds of library life, people checking out books, children at story time, the quiet hum of intellectual pursuit. Stephanie, can I ask you something? Of course. Did you know your family was planning to use my money for the wedding? The $90,000 wedding your mother was arranging? Stephanie's face went white. $90,000 for your wedding? You didn't know? I knew Mom was planning something elaborate, but $90,000? She shook her head in disbelief. Nicole, that's insane. That's more than my entire graduate program costs. It's also more than David makes in a year. How were they planning to? She stopped, understanding dawning on her face. They were planning to use your inheritance without asking me, without even telling me they knew about it. Stephanie buried her face in her hands. I can't believe my own family. I mean, I can believe it, which is almost worse. What do you mean? This isn't the first time they've done something like this. When Marcus was engaged to Jennifer, they put so much pressure on him to get money from her family that he started having panic attacks. When he finally told them he couldn't do it anymore, they made him feel like he was betraying all of us. Is that why he moved away? He moved away because Mom told him he was selfish for choosing his girlfriend's comfort over his family's survival. She said if he really loved us, he'd find a way to make the relationship work financially. I thought about Marcus Harrison, the older brother who was never mentioned in family conversations, who didn't appear in recent family photos, who'd essentially been erased from family history for refusing to monetize his romantic relationship. What happened to Jennifer? She broke up with him when she realized what our family was asking him to do. She told him she couldn't marry into a family that saw her as a bank account. Stephanie looked up at me with fresh tears. Sound familiar? Very. Marcus tried to maintain relationships with both sides, but eventually he had to choose. He chose his own sanity and Jennifer's respect over our family's financial problems. Are they still together? They got married last year. He didn't invite any of us to the wedding. Stephanie's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't blame him. Do you stay in touch with him? Sometimes. He texts me on my birthday, sends Christmas cards. But he won't come home, won't visit, won't be part of family events. He says our family is toxic and he won't expose Jennifer to that environment. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. The Harrison family's pattern of financial manipulation went back years and had already cost them one son. Now they were on the verge of losing David's relationship and potentially Stephanie's. Respect as well. What are you going to do about your tuition? I asked. I don't know. Maybe take a semester off, work and save money. Maybe transfer to a less expensive program. She shrugged. Figure it out like people do when they don't have family members to manipulate. You could get student loans. I'm already maxed out on federal loans. My credit isn't good enough for private ones because of some medical debt from last year. What about your parents? Can't they help at all? Stephanie laughed bitterly. Nicole, my parents are broke. Completely, utterly broke. That house? They're going to lose it next month. Dad's business? It doesn't exist anymore. Mom's jewelry? Most of... It's been pawned or sold. Then why the elaborate charade? Why maintain the pretense of wealth? Because admitting failure would mean admitting that everything they've built their identity around is a lie. It's easier to find someone else to solve the problem than to face the reality of their situation. I looked at this young woman, intelligent, honest, caught in the middle of her family's financial and emotional dysfunction, and felt genuinely sorry for her. Stephanie, what would you do if I offered to pay your tuition? Her eyes widened. What? If I wrote you a check right now for $24,000, what would happen? I would be so grateful I'd probably cry for a week. And then, what? And then ... double quote, she paused, thinking. And then my family would expect you to help with the house. and David's debt, and whatever other financial crisis comes up next. And if I said no to those other requests, they'd pressure me to pressure you. They'd make me feel guilty for accepting help when I couldn't convince you to help them too. So accepting my help would put you in an impossible position. Yes. Her voice was small and sad. God, Nicole, we really are toxic, aren't we? Your family has developed some very unhealthy patterns around money and relationships, but you don't have to perpetuate those patterns. What do you mean? I mean, you get to choose what kind of person you want to be. You get to decide whether you'll use people for their resources or value them for who they are. Stephanie was quiet. For a long moment, I don't want to be like them. Then don't be. But how do I finish school? How do I build a life without becoming financially dependent on someone I'm manipulating? I reached into my purse and pulled out Attorney Peterson's business card. Start by talking to this lawyer about your options. Student advocacy, financial aid appeals, scholarship opportunities you might have missed. There are legitimate ways to solve financial problems that don't involve manipulating people. Stephanie took the card with trembling hands. You're helping me even after what my family did to you. I'm pointing you toward resources. What you do with them is up to you. Why? Because you're the only one who's shown genuine remorse for what happened. Because you're young enough to choose a different path than your family's. And because my grandmother always said the best revenge against people who try to make you small is to help others become larger. Stephanie started crying again, but this time it seemed like relief rather than distress. Thank you, she said, for everything. For seeing me as a person instead of just part of the family that hurt you. You are a person, Stephanie. Don't let anyone, including your family, convince you that your worth is tied to your ability to provide financial solutions to other people's problems. As Stephanie left the library, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope for a reconciliation with the Harrison family, but hope that at least one member of that family might break the cycle of financial manipulation and emotional exploitation that had already cost them so much. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people is show them there's a different way to live. Even if they can't choose that path immediately, they'll know it exists when they're ready to walk away from the toxicity. And sometimes that knowledge is the most valuable gift you can give. 3 months after walking away from the Harrison family, I found myself standing in the doorway of a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the Arts District downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, and built-in bookshelves lined one entire wall perfect for my ever-growing collection. I'll take it, I told the landlord, who seemed slightly surprised by my immediate decision. Don't you want to see the rest of the building, the amenities, discuss the lease terms? I've done my research. This is exactly what I want. What I wanted was a space that reflected who I really was, someone who valued books and light and beauty, someone who could afford quality without ostentation, someone who made decisions based on what brought joy rather than what impressed others. Moving day was a revelation. I'd been living in my old apartment for 6 years, accumulating the comfortable clutter of a modest life. As I packed my books, I found notes from my grandmother tucked between the pages, little pieces of wisdom she'd left for me to discover when I needed them. MIJA. Never be afraid to start over. Every ending is also a beginning. The right people will love you for who you are. The wrong people will love you for what you can provide. Learn the difference. Money is a tool, not a measure of worth. Use it wisely, but never let it define you. Each note felt like a conversation with Elena, guidance from beyond that helped me navigate this new chapter of my life. My first purchase for the new apartment was a gorgeous antique desk that I positioned near the largest window. My second was a top-of-the-line coffee machine, a small luxury that made me smile every morning. My third was a donation to the library's literacy program in my grandmother's name. I was learning to live authentically, with my inheritance, using it to enhance my life without letting it change my fundamental values. The money gave me freedom and security, but it didn't make me a different person. It just allowed me to be more fully myself. The Harrison family made one final attempt at contact in the form of a letter from David that arrived 6 weeks after my move. His handwriting looked shaky, desperate. "Nicole, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I had to try one more time. Things have gotten really bad for my family. We lost the house last month. Mom and Dad are staying with Stephanie in her tiny apartment, and the stress is killing all of us. I've been thinking about everything you said, about how we treated you, and I think I'm starting to understand. We were so focused on our problems that we couldn't see how our behavior was affecting you. We were wrong. I'm not asking you to get back together with me. I'm not even asking you to forgive us. I'm just asking if there's any way you could find it in your heart to help my family get back on their feet. As a loan with interest, with whatever terms you think are fair. I know we don't deserve your help after everything that happened, but my parents are in their 60s and starting over at their age seems impossible. Stephanie had to drop out of school, and she's so depressed she barely gets out of bed. Please, Nicole. I'm begging you." David, I read the letter twice, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for their situation, anger at the continued assumption that their problems were my responsibility, and something approaching pity for people who still couldn't understand why their approach was fundamentally wrong. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I made a phone call. "Attorney Peterson? It's Nicole Lima. I need to set up the scholarship fund." An hour later, I was back in her office, outlining my vision for the Elena Martinez Educational Foundation, a scholarship program for first-generation college students facing financial hardship. "I want to help people like Stephanie," I explained. "Students who are genuinely committed to their education but caught in impossible financial situations." "That's a wonderful idea. How much are you thinking of funding it with?" $500,000 to start. "More if the program is successful." Attorney Peterson smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so. I want to help people, but I want to do it in a way that doesn't enable manipulation or dependency. Scholarships are perfect for that. Recipients have to meet academic standards and demonstrate genuine need. There's accountability built into the process." The Elena Martinez Educational Foundation launched 2 months later. I didn't publicize my involvement beyond what was legally required, but word got around academic circles quickly. Applications poured in from deserving students all over the state. Stephanie Harrison was not among the applicants. I learned why through Sarah, my coworker at the library who'd run into Stephanie at a coffee shop near the university. She said she was working 2 jobs trying to save money to re-enroll next year, Sarah told me. She looked exhausted, but she seemed, I don't know, more grounded than before. Like she was learning to solve her own problems. Did she mention her family? She said her parents moved to a smaller apartment and that her father found a job with a financial planning firm. Not as the owner, this time as an employee. She said it was hard for him, but the having steady income was helping everyone's stress levels. And David? She didn't mention him specifically, but she said her brother was seeing a therapist about family issues. I was glad to hear that the Harrisons were finding ways to rebuild their lives without expecting someone else to finance their recovery. Maybe losing access to my inheritance had forced them to develop healthier coping mechanisms, or maybe they were just looking for their next mark. I chose to hope it was the former. My own life was flourishing in ways I'd never expected. The freedom that came with financial security allowed me to pursue interests I'd always put aside. I started taking art classes at the community college, learned to make pottery, and joined a book club full of interesting, intellectually curious people who knew nothing about my bank balance. I also started dating again carefully, thoughtfully, with clear boundaries about money and expectations. I met James at the book club, where he was leading a discussion about historical fiction. He was a high school English teacher with a passion for literature and a complete lack of interest in my financial status. On our 3rd date, when he insisted on splitting the check at a restaurant I'd chosen, I knew I'd found someone who understood the difference between partnership and dependency. "I don't need you to pay for everything," he said with a smile. "I asked you out because I enjoy your company, not because I want you to finance my lifestyle." The contrast with David's approach to money and relationships was stark and refreshing. 6 months after moving into my new apartment, I received an unexpected piece of mail, a graduation announcement from Stephanie Harrison. She'd managed to re-enroll in school through a combination of student loans, work-study programs, and merit-based scholarships. She was graduating with her master's degree in environmental science. Tucked inside the announcement was a handwritten note. Nicole, I wanted you to know that I finished my degree on my own. It took longer than planned and required some creative financing, but I did it without manipulating anyone or expecting family members to solve my problems. Also wanted to thank you for pointing me toward legitimate resources when I came to. See you at the library. Attorney Peterson helped me navigate the financial aid appeals process, and I was able to secure enough funding to complete my program. I know my family hurt you deeply, and I know a graduation announcement doesn't make up for that, but I wanted you to see that at least one of us learned something valuable from what happened. I hope you're happy and that you found people who appreciate you for who you are rather than what you can provide. With genuine gratitude, STEPHANIEPS. I heard about the Scholarship Foundation. You're helping so many students who deserve a chance to succeed. Thank you for turning a painful experience into something positive. I kept Stephanie's note, piling it away with my grandmother's letters as a reminder that sometimes the most difficult experiences teach the most important lessons not just to us, but to the people around us. A year after leaving the Harrison family, I was living a life that felt authentically mine for the first time in years. My work at the library remained fulfilling, but I also started volunteering with literacy programs and serving on the scholarship committee for my foundation. James and I had grown close, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than financial calculation. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people and situations. The Harrison family had taught me to recognize the difference between being valued as a person and being coveted as a resource. That knowledge had become a filter through which I evaluated all new relationships, both romantic and platonic. One evening, as I sat in my beautiful apartment reading a book while James graded papers at the kitchen table, I thought about my grandmother's letter and her prediction that I'd be grateful to have options when people showed their true colors. She'd been right about everything. The money had given me options. The option to walk away from people who didn't respect me. The option to build a life that reflected my values. The option to help others without being manipulated or exploited. But the most valuable thing my inheritance had given me wasn't financial security. It was the knowledge that I was worth more than my bank balance, that I deserved love and respect regardless of what I could provide, and that I never had to accept less than I deserved from anyone. The Harrison family had tried to make me feel small, unworthy, grateful for scraps of conditional acceptance. Instead, they taught me to recognize my own value and demand that others recognize it too. That was a lesson worth every penny of the inheritance they'd tried so hard to claim. 2 years had passed since I'd walked away from the Harrison family, and I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a crisp autumn morning, working on my laptop. The Elena Martinez Educational Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations, funding scholarships for over 200 students across 3 states. Today, I was reviewing applications for our newest program, emergency grants for students facing unexpected financial crises. Excuse me, are you Nicole Lima? I looked up to see a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile standing beside my table. Yes, I am. I'm Maria Santos. I received a scholarship from your foundation last year. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Please, sit down. I'd love to hear how things are going. Maria sat down, clutching a portfolio bag. I'm graduating next month with my degree in social work. I wanted to thank you personally and to show you something. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a beautifully bound thesis. I wrote my senior project about first-generation college students and the barriers they face. Your foundation was part of my research, and I wanted you to have a copy. I accepted the thesis, touched by the gesture. This is wonderful, Maria. What's next for you? I got a job with the county's Family Services Department. I'll be working with at-risk youth, helping them navigate educational and financial resources. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. I want to help other kids like me find pathways to success. As Maria told me about her plans, I thought about the ripple effects of financial support given freely and without strings attached. Maria would help dozens of young people over the course of her career, and some of them would go on to help others in turn. The impact of my grandmother's money would continue spreading long after I was gone. After Maria left, I pulled out a leather notebook I'd been keeping for the past year, a record of reflections and gratitudes. Today's entry would be about witnessing the transformation of financial resources into human potential. I was in the middle of writing when my phone buzzed with a text from James. Lunch today? I have news to share. We met at a small bistro near his school where he was practically bouncing with excitement. I got the grant, he announced before I even sat down. The literacy program grant? $200,000 over 3 years to develop a curriculum for adult learners. Nicole, this is going to change everything for our students. James had been working for months on a proposal to help adults improve their reading skills. Many of them parents who wanted to better support their children's education. Watching his passion for this work had been one of the many things that had drawn me to him. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning every word. I couldn't have done it without your encouragement. And your connections didn't hurt either. I'd introduced James to some colleagues in education philanthropy, but the success of his proposal was entirely due to his own dedication and innovative approach. This calls for a celebration, I said. Actually, I was thinking the same thing. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Nicole, these past 18 months with you have been the happiest of my life. My heart stopped as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant, solitaire ring. I love your intelligence, your kindness, your commitment to making the world better. I love how you make decisions based on your values rather than other people's expectations. I love that you see people for who they are, not what they can provide. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. Will you marry me? The contrast with David's proposal couldn't have been starker. David had proposed during a family dinner, with his parents' obvious approval and immediate discussions about wedding budgets and venue availability. James was proposing because he wanted to build a life with me, not because I fit into his family's financial strategy. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Absolutely yes. As James slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about my grandmother's letter and her wisdom about finding people who would love me for who I was rather than what I could provide. James had never asked about my finances, never suggested that my money could solve his problems, never treated me as anything other than an equal partner. That evening, we called our families to share the news. James's parents were delighted, immediately launching into discussions about engagement parties and wedding planning. My extended family cousins and aunts I'd reconnected with after my grandmother's death were equally thrilled. Nobody mentioned money. Nobody calculated the financial benefits of our union. Nobody suggested that James was lucky to be marrying someone with resources. It was exactly how an engagement announcement should be received. A week later, I was at the library when Sarah approached my desk with an odd expression. Nicole, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Marcus Harrison. I looked up, surprised. Marcus stood near the reference desk, looking nervous but determined. He was tall like David, but leaner, with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence. Thank you for seeing me, he said when I approached. I know this is probably awkward. A little, I admitted. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize. For my family's behavior, for what they put you through, for the way they treated someone who deserved so much better. We found a quiet corner to talk, and Marcus told me about his own experience with the family's financial manipulation. When I chose Jennifer over their demands for money, they essentially disowned me, he said. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was also the best one. How did you know I'd understand? Stephanie told me what happened. She said you were the first person who'd shown her that there was a different way to live, that she didn't have to perpetuate the family's patterns. How is Stephanie doing? She's thriving. She got a job with an environmental consulting firm. She's in therapy working through family issues. And she's learning to build healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial utility. Marcus paused, then continued. She also told me about your scholarship foundation. The fact that you turned such a painful experience into something that helps others, that's remarkable. It's what my grandmother would have wanted. Speaking of which, I brought you something. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a framed photograph. This was taken at a family gathering about 5 years ago, before everything went bad. You weren't there yet, but Stephanie thought you might like to have it. The photo showed a younger, happier version of the Harrison family. Robert and Margaret looked relaxed and genuinely affectionate. David and Stephanie were laughing at something off camera. Even in the midst of everything that had happened, seeing them in a moment of authentic joy made me feel a complex mix of sadness and forgiveness. "Thank you," I said, accepting the photo. "How are your parents doing?" "Better, actually." Losing the house and facing the reality of their financial situation forced them to make some difficult changes. Dad's working for someone else now instead of trying to run his own business, and they're living within their means for the first time in years. And David? Marcus was quiet for a moment. David's struggling. The therapy's helping, but he's having to confront the fact that he chose financial pressure over love. That's not an easy realization to live with. I hope he finds peace with it. He's getting there, slowly, but Nicole, I wanted you to know that what you did walking away when you did probably saved our family from even worse behavior. If you'd stayed and tried to help financially, it would have enabled patterns that were already destroying us. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused and looked at me with genuine warmth. "I heard about your engagement. Congratulations." "Thank you. How did you?" Stephanie follows your foundation's social media. She's incredibly proud of what you've built, even though she knows she doesn't have the right to claim any connection to your success. After Marcus left, I sat in my car for a long time, processing our conversation. The Harrison family story had continued to evolve after I'd left, and at least some of them had learned from the experience. It didn't excuse their behavior or erase the pain they caused, but it offered a kind of closure I hadn't expected to find. That night, I sat down at my antique desk and wrote a final entry in my reflection notebook. Today, I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most teach us the most valuable lessons. The Harrison family tried to reduce me to my financial utility, but in doing so, they forced me to discover my true worth. They showed me what I would never accept again, which helped me recognize what I truly deserved. I'm grateful for the pain they caused, because it led me to the joy I have now. I'm grateful for their attempts to diminish me, because they ultimately made me stronger. And I'm grateful for their greed, because it taught me the difference between conditional love and unconditional acceptance. Tomorrow, I marry a man who has never asked me for anything except my heart. We're building a life based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine partnership. My money enhances our options, but it doesn't define our relationship. Grandma Elena was right about everything. The right people love you for who you are. The wrong people love you for what you can provide. And learning the difference is worth every difficult experience it takes to understand. I am worthy of love, respect, and authentic partnership. I always was. I just needed to believe it. I closed the notebook and put it away, ready to move forward into a future built on the solid foundation of my own self-worth. The Harrison family had tried to convince me that I should be grateful for conditional acceptance. Instead, they taught me to demand unconditional love. And in James, in my work, in the life I built for myself, I found exactly that dot sometimes. The most painful lessons lead to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes the people who try to break us actually teach us how strong we really are. And sometimes the inheritance that matters most isn't money, it's the knowledge that we deserve. To be loved for exactly who we are.